Here, buy yourself some food and maybe a bus ticket to wherever you came from.
Billionaire CEO humiliates homeless woman. A T airport discovers she's his ex-wife. His child. The $20 bill hit the polished airport floor with barely a sound, but it might as well have been a bomb going off. Damien Cross stood over the crouched woman, his $6,000 suit crisp and perfect, his steel-gray eyes cold as winter. Around them, Terminal C at Chicago O'Hare buzzed with the usual chaos. The travelers rushing to gates, dragging luggage, checking phones. But right now, in this moment, a circle of silence had formed around the scene playing out near Gate 47. "Here," Damien said, his voice dripping with contempt as he gestured at the money on the ground. "Buy yourself some food, and maybe a bus ticket to wherever you came from. And next time, stay out of the way of people who actually contribute to society." The woman didn't move. She sat on her knees, hands trembling, surrounded by scattered belongings she'd been frantically trying to gather after their collision. A worn duffel bag, a few personal items, a small stuffed rabbit that had rolled near Damien's expensive Italian leather shoes, and that cardboard sign, the one that read, "Homeless. Anything helps. God bless." She looked up at him, and for just a fraction of a second, something flickered in her hazel eyes. Recognition? No, that couldn't be right. Damien didn't know this woman. He'd never seen her before in his life. Several travelers had stopped to watch. Some pulled out their phones, recording. A few whispered to each other, shaking their heads. But Damien didn't care. He'd just closed an $800 million deal in San Francisco. His private jet was being refueled. He had exactly 43 minutes before takeoff back to New York, and he wasn't about to waste another second on this situation. Have you ever walked past someone who desperately needed help? Have you ever been so focused on where you're going that you forgot to see who was right in front of you? Have you ever climbed so high that you stopped looking down at the people you left behind? Hi, viewers. Kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. What this billionaire CEO is about to discover will shatter everything he thought he knew about success, family, and the true cost of ambition. Because the woman trembling on the floor of this airport terminal isn't a stranger. She's holding a secret that will destroy him, and in about 30 seconds, he's going to walk away without ever knowing what he just did. But before we get to that moment, before we reveal the truth that will break your heart, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on those notifications, because what happens next in this story will make you question everything you think you know about what really matters in life. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you do if you saw someone treating a homeless person like this? Would you speak up? Would you walk away? Would you record it and post it online? Keep watching. The truth is coming, and it's worse than you can possibly imagine. Damien's assistant, Veronica, touched his arm gently. "Mr. Cross? Perhaps we're done here," Damien announced, cutting her off. He stepped around the woman as if she were nothing more than an obstacle in his path. His security guard, a thick-necked man named Torres, moved to follow. Behind them, Damien's second assistant juggled a tablet and 2 phones, trying to keep up with his boss's long strides. Damien's phone buzzed in his hand. Another email from the board. Another investor wanting a call. Another opportunity to expand cross-tech industries. His $8 billion technology empire that had made him one of the most powerful men in Silicon Valley. He swiped through his notifications without breaking stride. Forbes had just named him one of the most influential tech innovators of the decade. The article was trending on social media. His face was everywhere. Damien Cross, the genius who'd revolutionized data management platforms. The visionary who'd taken a startup run from a cramped apartment and turned it into a global powerhouse. The man who had everything. He allowed himself a small smile as he read the headline. He'd earned every word of that praise through ruthless determination and an unwillingness to let anything or anyone stand in his way. Behind him, the woman finally moved. Her thin fingers, worn and rough from years of hardship, picked up the $20 bill. She clutched it in one hand, while pressing that stuffed rabbit against her chest with the other. Tears streamed down her weathered face, cutting tracks through the grime and exhaustion that had become her constant companions. Her name was Sienna Vale, and 15 years ago, she had been Damien Cross's wife. But Damien didn't look back. He never looked back. That was one of his rules, one of the principles that had made him successful. Forward motion. Always forward. Never dwelling on the past. Never second-guessing decisions. Never letting sentiment slow you down. Mr. Cross, the contracts from the San Francisco deal are ready for your signature, Veronica said breathlessly, still struggling to match his pace. Should I have them sent to your secure email? Yes, I'll review them in flight, Damien replied without looking at her. His eyes were already scanning ahead, planning his next move. The New York office would be waiting for his arrival. There was a board meeting tomorrow morning at 8. He had a conference call with Tokyo investors at 6. There were 100 things that needed his attention, 100 decisions that only he could make. This was what success looked like. This constant motion, this relentless drive, this absolute focus on what mattered. And what mattered was cross-tech. What mattered was growth, market share, shareholder value, innovation. What mattered was staying on top in an industry that would eat you alive the second you showed weakness. The fluorescent lights overhead cast sharp shadows across the terminal. Gate 47 came into view. Damien could see his pilot through the window, running pre-flight checks on the Gulfstream G650. $20 million worth of private aviation, waiting just for him. Sir, there's also the matter of the Hong Kong expansion. His second assistant, a nervous young man named Preston, piped up. The Minister of Technology is requesting a meeting next week. Should I confirm? Confirm it, and set up calls with our legal team about the regulatory requirements. Yes, sir. They reached the gate. Torres scanned the area with professional efficiency, checking for threats that would never materialize, but that he was paid handsomely to anticipate anyway. Veronica held out a tablet for Damien to review departure logistics. Preston juggled phones like a circus performer, and somewhere behind them, back near the collision site, Sienna Vale slowly gathered her scattered belongings with shaking hands. She stuffed the $20 bill into her pocket. She picked up her duffel bag. She held that stuffed rabbit, worn soft from years of a child's love, close to her heart. A few travelers had stopped to help her collect her things. A middle-aged woman handed her a bottle of water. An older gentleman offered a kind word, but most people just walked past, their eyes sliding away from her like water off glass. That was how it worked when you were homeless. You became invisible. You became something people looked through rather than at. But that was fine. Sienna was used to being invisible. She'd been invisible for a long time now. She stood slowly, her joints protesting. At 31 years old, she moved like someone twice her age. The constant stress, the poor nutrition, the endless worry, it had aged her in ways that went deeper than just the premature gray streaking through her dark hair or the lines carved into her face. She adjusted the straps on her duffel bag and started walking toward the exit. She had to get back to the shelter before 8 o'clock, or she'd lose her spot for the night. And more importantly, she needed to get back to Felix. Felix, her 5-year-old son, her reason for breathing, for surviving, for getting up every single day and facing a world that seemed designed to crush people like her. Felix, who was waiting at the shelter with Miss Carmen, one of the few volunteers Sienna trusted to watch him. Felix, who had his father's gray eyes and his father's dark hair and his father's quick mind. Felix, who asked questions about everything and laughed at silly jokes and gave the best hugs in the entire world. Felix, who had never met his father, who didn't know that the man who just humiliated his mother in the middle of an airport terminal was the same man whose blood ran through his veins. Sienna's hands were still shaking as she walked. She could still feel the weight of Damien's contempt, still hear his voice cutting through her like a blade. People who actually contribute to society, as if her existence was worthless, as if she'd chosen this life, as if poverty was a moral failing rather than a circumstance. But the worst part, the part that made her chest tighten and her throat close, was that he hadn't recognized her. He'd looked right at her, right into her eyes, and he'd seen nothing. No flash of memory, no moment of connection, nothing. She'd been erased from his life so completely that even face to face, she was just another homeless person to step over. Sienna reached the terminal exit and paused, looking back one last time. Through the crowd, she could just make out Damien's figure in the distance, boarding his private jet. Tall, confident, powerful, everything he'd always wanted to be. A businessman bumped into her, muttered something annoyed, and kept walking. Sienna adjusted her grip on the duffel bag and the stuffed rabbit and stepped out into the Chicago evening. The city stretched out before her, all lights and noise and movement. Somewhere in this sprawling mess of humanity was a shelter bed with her name on it. Somewhere was her son, probably playing with the other kids, probably asking Miss Carmen when Mommy would be back. Somewhere was the life she was barely managing to survive, day by terrible day. And somewhere, lifting off into the sky in a $20 million jet, was the man who'd promised to love her forever. The man who'd held her hand at their wedding and sworn he'd never let her go. The man who'd looked into her eyes 15 years ago and told her they would change the world together. That man was gone. Or maybe he'd never really existed at all. Maybe Damien Cross had always been the person she'd just encountered. Cold, dismissive, focused only on success. Maybe the version of him she'd loved had just been a temporary mask, worn until he didn't need her anymore. Sienna walked toward the bus stop, her worn shoes slapping against the pavement. The stuffed rabbit, Felix's favorite, the one he insisted she carry everywhere for good luck, pressed against her chest. Inside her pocket, the $20 bill felt like it was burning through the fabric. She'd use it to buy Felix a hot meal tonight. Maybe get him some new crayons. He'd worn his others down to nubs, but he loved to draw. He was good at it, too, creating elaborate pictures of families and houses and trees and sunshine. All the things they didn't have, but that he could imagine into existence on paper. The bus arrived. Sienna climbed aboard, dropped coins into the fare box, and found a seat in the back. Other passengers eyed her with that mixture of pity and discomfort that she knew too well. She kept her head down, made herself small, tried to take up as little space as possible. Through the window, she watched the airport fade into the distance, watched the planes taking off, lifting into the darkening sky. One of them was carrying Damien Cross back to his empire, back to his billions, back to the life he'd built on the ruins of everything they'd once shared. He would never think about this encounter again. By tomorrow, he wouldn't even remember the homeless woman he'd insulted. She would be just another forgettable moment in a day full of more important things. But Sienna would remember. She would carry this moment with all the other moments, all the broken promises and shattered dreams and bitter truths. She would add it to the weight she was already carrying, and somehow she would find the strength to keep going. Because she had to. Because Felix needed her. Because giving up wasn't an option when you were the only thing standing between your child and complete disaster. The bus rumbled through Chicago's streets. Sienna closed her eyes and let her head rest against the cold window. In a few minutes, she'd be back at the shelter. She'd find Felix and hold him tight and tell him she loved him. She'd read him his favorite bedtime story, even though the shelter, lights out policy, meant she'd have to whisper it by flashlight. She'd watch him fall asleep and marvel, like she did every night, that something so perfect could have come from something so broken. And tomorrow, she'd get up and do it all over again. Because that was survival. That was motherhood. That was love. Even if the man who'd helped create that beautiful child had forgotten they even existed. What Sienna didn't know, what she couldn't possibly, as that bus carried her away from O'Hare International Airport, was that at least a dozen people had recorded Damien's cruel speech on their phones. What she didn't know was that right now, at this very moment, those videos were being uploaded to social media. What she didn't know was that within the next few hours, millions of people would watch Damien Cross humiliate a homeless woman. And what she really didn't know was that someone, somewhere in that growing crowd of outraged viewers, would recognize her face. So, do you think Damien deserves what's coming to him? Do you think Sienna should tell him the truth about Felix? What would you do if you were in her position? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. I want to hear what you think. And if you're not already subscribed to American Lore Chronicles TV by Mr. Jeff, hit that button now, because the next chapter is going to blow your mind. The coffee shop smelled like heaven. Rich espresso, sweet pastries, and the slightly burnt aroma of beans roasted just a touch too long. Damien Cross practically lived in this place during his graduate school years, camped out at the corner table by the window from opening until closing, surviving on caffeine and ambition. His laptop sat open in front of him, screen filled with lines of code that blurred together after the 15th hour of straight work. Empty coffee cups formed a small city on his table. His eyes burned. His back ached. His bank account had exactly $47 in it, and rent was due in 3 days. But none of that mattered, because this project, this beautiful, complicated, revolutionary platform he was building, was going to change everything. He could feel it in his bones. This, the one, This was his ticket out of poverty, out of struggle, out of the endless cycle of failed startups and maxed-out credit cards. He just needed to make it work. Just needed to solve this one problem with the data encryption algorithm. Just needed to figure out why the user interface kept crashing when you're going to give yourself a heart attack with all that coffee. Damien looked up, blinking away the code-induced haze. The barista stood beside his table, holding another full cup, even though he hadn't ordered one. She was smiling. Not the fake customer service smile he usually got, but something genuine and warm that made his exhausted brain stutter. Probably, he admitted, rubbing his eyes. But if this project works, it'll be worth it. She set down the cup, his fifth of the night, and tilted her head to look at his screen. What are you working on? That simple question opened a door. Damien found himself explaining his vision for a platform that would revolutionize how businesses managed their data. He talked about security protocols and user experience and market gaps. He used his hands to gesture, getting more animated as he went, forgetting for a moment how tired he was or how impossible the task sometimes felt. The barista, her name tag said Sienna, listened with genuine interest. She asked smart questions. She understood the concepts faster than most of his professors. And when he finally ran out of words, she was still smiling. "You're going to change the world," she said simply. Damien felt something shift in his chest, not just because she believed in his project, but because of the way she looked at him when she said it. Like he was someone worth believing in. "What about you?" he asked, suddenly curious about this woman who'd been bringing him coffee for weeks, but who he'd never really noticed. "What's your dream?" Sienna's eyes lit up. She pulled out a chair. Technically, she was supposed to be working, but the coffee shop was dead at this hour, and told him about her graduate program in social work, about her plans to open a community center that would provide resources for families in crisis, about her volunteer work at homeless shelters, and her belief that every person deserved dignity and a second chance. They talked until the manager kicked them out at closing time. Then they stood outside the coffee shop for another hour. Conversation, flowing like they'd known each other for years instead of minutes. Damien learned that Sienna worked 2 jobs to pay for her textbooks, that she'd grown up in Portland with a single mother who'd taught her the importance of helping others, that she laughed at terrible jokes and believed the best in people even when they disappointed her. "I should let you get home," Damien finally said, though he didn't want the conversation to end. "But maybe, could we do this again? Talk, I mean." Sienna's smile could have lit up the entire campus. "I work tomorrow night. Same table will be available. I'll save it for you." That was how it started. One conversation that turned into dozens. Damien showed up every night, and Sienna always saved him the corner table. He'd work on his code while she served other customers. But during her breaks, she'd sit with him. They'd talk about everything and nothing. His dreams of building something that mattered, passion for helping people, their shared belief that they could make the world better somehow. 6 months later, they were living together in Damien's cramped studio apartment near campus. It wasn't much, just one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom so small you had to step into the shower to close the door. But it was theirs. Sienna would study at the tiny desk while Damien coded on the bed. They'd cook cheap meals together. Pasta with whatever vegetables were on sale, rice and beans, ramen upgraded with eggs and frozen vegetables. They'd laugh when things went wrong, like the time Damien tried to impress her with homemade pizza, set off the smoke detector, or when Sienna accidentally dyed all their clothes pink by mixing laundry. Money was always tight. Damien's first startup had failed spectacularly, burning through their meager savings and leaving them $15,000 in debt. Sienna picked up extra shifts at the coffee shop and started tutoring on weekends. She never complained, never made Damien feel guilty for chasing a dream that kept not quite working out. "We'll get through this," she'd say whenever he got discouraged. "As long as we have each other, we can get through anything." And Damien believed her. During those years, he was different. Humbler, more grateful, more connected to what actually mattered. Success wasn't some abstract concept. It was being able to afford groceries and rent. Wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in moments. Like the night Sienna surprised him with a birthday cake she'd baked in their terrible oven, or the morning they woke up early and walked to campus together, watching the sunrise and talking about the future they'd build. He'd take breaks from coding to help Sienna prepare lesson plans for the youth program she was developing. She'd proofread his business proposals and investor pitches, catching mistakes and suggesting better ways to phrase his vision. They were team. They were partners. They were building something together that felt more important than any startup could ever be. On a sunny afternoon in May, they got married at a local park. Sienna wore a dress she'd found at a thrift store for $30. Simple and white, with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt that made her look like something out of a fairy tale. Damien borrowed a suit from his roommate, and it didn't quite fit, but he didn't care. They'd invited close friends and family. Sienna's mother came down from Portland with her younger sister. Damien's parents flew in from Ohio. There were maybe 30 people total, sitting on folding chairs someone had borrowed from a community center. The rings cost less than $100 for both, simple silver bands from a jewelry store having a clearance sale. No diamonds, no elaborate engravings, just 2 circles of metal that represented everything they were promising each other. A friend from Damien's computer science program, ordained online specifically for this occasion, performed the ceremony. His hands shook as he read from a printed script, messing up the words and making everyone laugh. But when it came time for vows, the laughter stopped. Damien took Sienna's hands in his and looked into her hazel eyes. "I promise to love you through every season of life, when things are good and when they're hard, when we have money and when we're broke, when I'm successful and when I fail. I promise to always see you, always hear you, always make you feel like you're the most important person in my world. Because you are." Sienna's voice trembled as she said her vows. "I promise to stand by you through success and failure, through the good days and the impossible ones. I promise to believe in your dreams and help you chase them. I promise to build a life with you that matters, not because of what we have, but because of who we are together." When they kissed, everyone cheered. Someone played music from a phone connected to a portable speaker. Damien and Sienna danced on the grass, holding each other close, laughing. When Damien accidentally stepped on her dress and nearly tripped them both. "I love you, Sienna Vale Cross," Damien whispered against her hair. "I love you, Damien Cross," Sienna replied, tears of joy streaming down her face. Always and forever. The reception was potluck style. Everyone brought a dish to share. They ate on paper plates and drank cheap champagne from plastic cups. There were speeches that went on too long, and jokes that weren't quite funny and moments of pure, unfiltered happiness that Damien would remember for the rest of his life. Or, at least, he thought he'd remember them. Years later, those memories would fade into something distant and dreamlike, as if they'd happened to someone else entirely. But on that May afternoon, sitting on the grass with Sienna's head on his shoulder, and the sun setting behind them, Damien meant every word he'd promised. He couldn't imagine a future where work would matter more than this woman, where success would taste sweeter than her smile, where anything could be more important than the life they were going to build together. "What are you thinking about?" Sienna asked, lacing her fingers through his. "How lucky I am," Damien said. And he meant it completely. The first 3 years of their marriage were hard in ways that money could measure. Their studio apartment had a leak in the ceiling that the landlord refused to fix. Their car broke down so often they eventually just sold it and started taking buses. Damien's second startup idea attracted some initial interest, but no actual funding. They lived on rice and beans, bargain, vegetables, and whatever was marked down at the grocery store, because it was about to expire. They were happy, genuinely, purely happy in a way that had nothing to do with circumstances and everything to do with choice. Sienna finished her graduate degree and got hired at a nonprofit that helped homeless families. The pay was terrible, barely above minimum wage, but she loved the work. She'd come home exhausted and tell Damien about the family she was helping, about the single mom who'd finally gotten approved for housing, about the veteran who'd gotten connected with mental health services, about the kids in the youth program she was running who were thriving despite impossible circumstances. "You're changing the world," Damien would tell her, kissing her forehead as she collapsed onto their second-hand couch. "We're going to change it together," she'd correct him. "Once your platform takes off, we can fund programs like mine all over the country. We can make a real difference." Damien believed her. In those days, he still thought success and compassion could coexist. That wealth and values weren't opposites. That he could build a company and keep his soul intact. He worked obsessively on his second startup, a data management platform he was calling CrossTech. It was more sophisticated than his first attempt, better designed, more responsive to actual market needs. He poured everything into it, nights and weekends, early mornings before Sienna woke up, every spare moment when he wasn't at his part-time job teaching coding classes at a community college. Sienna supported him completely. She'd massage his shoulders when they got tight from hunching over his laptop. She'd bring him snacks and remind him to eat. She'd listen to him talk through problems, offering insights that sometimes solved issues he'd been stuck on for days. They made love in their cramped bedroom with a tenderness that made Damien forget about their bank account balance. They laughed at ridiculous things, bad movies, stupid memes, their own mistakes and misfortunes. They talked about the future they'd have someday. The house with a yard. The kids they'd raise. The community center Sienna would run. The charitable foundation Damien would start once CrossTech made it big. "Promise me something," Sienna said one night, curled up against him in bed. "When we make it, and we will make it, promise me we won't forget this." "Forget what?" Damien asked, running his fingers through her hair. "This feeling, this closeness, how much we need each other. Promise me success won't change us." Damien pulled her closer. "Nothing could change us. We're forever, remember? Forever, Sienna agreed, and kissed him like she was sealing a deal. If only promises were as easy to keep as they were to make. When Damien was 28 years old, everything changed in a single phone call. He was at the community college, teaching an intro to programming class, when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally, he'd let it go to voicemail, but something made him step outside and answer. "Is this Damien Cross?" "Speaking, Mr. Cross. My name is Harrison Chen. I'm a partner at Velocity Capital. We're a venture capital firm here in Silicon Valley, and we've been following your work on cross-tech. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss potential investment opportunities." Damien's heart stopped. Velocity Capital was one of the biggest VC firms in the valley. Companies they backed became household names. Founders they invested in became billionaires. The meeting happened 3 days later. Damien wore his wedding suit, still the only suit he owned. He practiced his pitch with Sienna until he could recite it in his sleep. He walked into that conference room with equal parts terror and excitement. 2 hours later, he walked out with a term sheet for $5 million in series of funding. "Oh my God," Sienna shrieked when he told her, jumping into his arms. "Damien, this is it. This is everything we've been working for." They celebrated that night with takeout Chinese food and cheap wine. They talked about paying off their debt, getting a better apartment, maybe even buying a car that actually worked. They made plans and dreamed dreams and held each other close. But that $5 million was just the beginning. Within 6 months, CrossTech went from a 2-person operation run from their living room to a real company with an office and employees. Within a year, they'd closed a Series B round for $20 million. Within 18 months, Series C brought in $50 million, and a valuation that made Damien's head spin. Suddenly, there was money. Not just enough money, but more money than Damien had ever imagined having. The cramped studio apartment became a beautiful house in an exclusive neighborhood. The broken car became a luxury sedan. The thrift store clothes became designer labels. Damien hired assistants to manage his schedule. He brought on a personal trainer because he no longer had time to exercise. He got custom suits made because he was meeting with investors and board members and potential business partners who expected a certain image. Sienna watched all this happen with a mixture of pride and concern. She was happy for Damien. Of course she was. He'd worked so hard for this success. He deserved every bit of it. But she noticed changes. Small things at first. The way he'd check his phone during dinner. How he'd take calls at all hours, even when they were supposed to be spending time together. The board meetings that ran late. The investor dinners he had to attend. The business trips that seemed to multiply every month. "I'm doing this for us," Damien would say whenever Sienna gently mentioned how little time they were spending together. "Just a few more months of this crazy pace, and then things will settle down. I promise." But things never settled down. The more successful CrossTech became, the more demanding it got. Series D funding, international expansion, opening offices in New York, London, Singapore, hiring hundreds of employees, managing a board that expected exponential growth every quarter. Damien was flying somewhere almost every week. When he was home, he was exhausted or distracted or both. The intimate conversations they used to have, the ones where they'd talk for hours about everything and nothing, became shorter and more surface level. They'd talk logistics, schedules, what needed to be handled, but they stopped really talking. They still loved each other. At least Damien thought they did. But love started to feel like something they'd put on a shelf, promising to come back to it later when there was more time. There was never more time. Sienna kept working at her nonprofit. The pay was still terrible, but now it didn't matter, because Damien was making enough for both of them. She threw herself into her work, finding there the sense of purpose and connection that was slowly fading from her marriage. On her 26th birthday, Sienna took a pregnancy test and watched 2 pink lines appear. Her hands shook as she stared at that little plastic stick. Baby, they were going to have a baby. She felt joy, immediate and overwhelming. But underneath that joy was something else. Fear, because she looked at her marriage and saw a husband who was already barely present. What would happen when a baby arrived? Would Damien rise to the occasion, or would she end up raising their child essentially alone? Sienna pushed those fears away. This was good news. This was a blessing. This was what they'd always talked about. Starting a family, raising kids who would grow up knowing they were loved. She planned a special evening to tell Damien his favorite meal, pasta carbonara with homemade bread, candles on their dining room table, music playing softly in the background. She even bought a tiny pair of baby shoes and wrapped them in a box, planning the reveal like it was a marriage proposal. Damien was supposed to be home at 6. Sienna had everything ready, the food warm, the table set perfectly. She waited. 6:30 came and went. 7 o'clock. 7:30. She texted him. No response. At 8:45, she heard his car in the driveway. The front door opened. Damien walked in, phone pressed to his ear, deep in conversation with someone about an acquisition in Tokyo. He barely glanced at the cold dinner on the table, barely noticed the candles that had burned down to nubs. He held up one finger to Sienna. 1 minute. Just give me 1 minute. And kept talking. Sienna stood in their beautiful dining room, in the house that success had bought them, and felt more alone than she'd ever felt in the cramped studio apartment where they'd started. When Damien finally ended his call, he looked at her with distracted confusion. Sorry, that meeting ran way over. Is something wrong? Sienna wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted to shake him and make him see what was happening to them. Instead, she took a breath and handed him the wrapped box. What's this? Damien asked, opening it with impatient curiosity. He stared at the tiny shoes. For a long moment, he just stared, like his brain couldn't quite process what he was seeing. We're going to have a baby, Sienna said softly, watching his face for the reaction she'd been hoping for all day. But what she saw there made her heart sink. Not joy, not excitement, just concern, maybe even panic. A baby, Damien repeated slowly, still staring at those little shoes. Sienna, the timing is really complicated right now. And just like that, Sienna knew. Everything she'd feared was true. Her husband was already gone, even though he was standing right in front of her. The man she'd married, the one who'd danced with her at their park wedding, who'd promised nothing would ever be more important than them. That man had been replaced by someone she barely recognized, someone for whom a baby wasn't a blessing, but a complication. Not a joy, but a distraction. Not the beginning of their family, but an inconvenience in his schedule. Complicated, Sienna whispered, and heard her voice crack on the word. What happens when the person you love most becomes a stranger? What happens when the promises that once seemed unbreakable turn out to be made of nothing but air? And what happens when you realize you're about to bring a child into a marriage that's already dying? Comment below if you've ever felt invisible to someone who's supposed to love you. And hit subscribe, because what comes next will break your heart even more. The bleeding started on a Tuesday morning. Sienna was 3 months pregnant, standing in the kitchen of their beautiful house, making tea when she felt it. A sharp cramp, then wetness, then terror that made her hands shake so badly she dropped the mug, and it shattered on the expensive tile floor. She looked down. Blood. Too much blood. No, 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 Sienna whispered, pressing her hand against her stomach. Please, baby. Please hold on. Her phone was upstairs. She moved as fast as she dared, every step sending fresh waves of pain through her abdomen. She grabbed her phone with trembling fingers and called Damien first. Straight to voicemail. He was on a flight to London for a conference. She'd known he was leaving. He'd mentioned it yesterday in passing, like it was just another item on his calendar instead of 5 days away from his pregnant wife. Sienna called an ambulance. Then she called her mother in Portland. Then she sat on the bathroom floor, crying and praying and begging the universe to let her baby survive. The ambulance came. Paramedics loaded her onto a stretcher, while neighbors watched from their yards, probably gossiping about what drama was unfolding at the Cross House. Sienna didn't care. All she cared about was the life inside her that might be slipping away. At the hospital, doctors moved quickly. Ultrasound, blood, tests, internal exam. Sienna lay on the table and stared at the ceiling and tried not to fall apart completely while strangers discussed her pregnancy in clinical terms. There's the heartbeat, the ultrasound technician said, and Sienna started crying with relief. Baby's still there, still fighting. But the doctor's face was serious when she explained what was happening. Placental separation, high-risk pregnancy, bed rest required, stress reduction critical, strong emotional support essential. Do you have someone who can be with you? The doctor asked gently. A partner, family member, someone who can help care for you. Sienna thought about Damien, somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, probably reviewing presentations for his conference. My husband's traveling for work. You need to contact him. What you're dealing with requires support. Without it, you're at significant risk of losing this pregnancy. They kept Sienna overnight for observation. She lay in that hospital bed, alone, and tried calling Damien 15 times. Every call went straight to voicemail. She sent texts. She sent emails. She called his assistant, who promised to pass along the message that it was an emergency. But the conference was important. Damien had meetings scheduled with potential investors from across Europe. This was a crucial expansion opportunity for Crosstech. Surely his assistant wouldn't interrupt unless someone had actually died. Sienna was discharged the next afternoon with strict instructions. Complete bed rest, minimal stress, follow-up appointments weekly. Her mother was already on a plane from Portland. A friend from her nonprofit drove her home and helped her upstairs to bed. Damien called finally that evening, panic in his voice. "Sienna, I just got your messages. What happened? Are you okay? Is the baby?" "We're okay," Sienna said, too tired to be angry anymore. "For now. But I'm on bed rest. High-risk pregnancy. The doctor said I need support. I'll come home immediately. I'll catch the next flight out." "When is your conference over?" "Tomorrow night. But that doesn't matter. I'm coming." "Finish the conference," Sienna interrupted. She could hear it in his voice, the relief that she was giving him permission to stay. "My mom's arriving tonight. She can help until you get back." "Are you sure?" "No," Sienna wanted to scream. "I'm not sure at all. I'm terrified and I need my husband. And I shouldn't have to beg you to choose me over a business meeting." "I'm sure," she said instead. "Just come home as soon as you can. I promise. 2 days, and I'll be there. I love you, Sienna." "Love you too." But love was starting to feel like just another word. Something people said out of habit rather than meaning. Damien came home 2 days later, exactly as promised. He was attentive for about a week. He worked from home, bringing Sienna meals in bed. He went to a doctor's appointment with her. He seemed genuinely concerned and present and engaged. Then a crisis erupted at Crosstech's Shanghai office. Something about intellectual property theft, potential industrial espionage, legal complications that could cost the company millions, if not handled immediately. The board demanded Damien's personal involvement. This wasn't something he could delegate. This required him to fly to China, meet with government officials, navigate complex international business law. "I have to go," Damien told Sienna, already packing his suitcase. "This could destroy everything we've built." Sienna sat on their bed, watching him throw clothes into luggage. "We're what you've built," she said quietly. "This family, this marriage. But you're treating us like an afterthought." Damien stopped packing and looked at her, really looked at her. Maybe for the first time in weeks. "That's not fair, isn't it?" Sienna's voice was steady, but tears were streaming down her face. "Everything I'm doing is for this family. Do you think I enjoy being on planes constantly? Do you think I like missing out on things? I'm trying to build something that will provide for us, that will give our child every possible advantage in life." "Our child doesn't need advantages," Sienna replied. "Our child needs a father who's present, and I need a husband who remembers that I exist." The fight that followed was their first real one. Not a disagreement or a tense conversation, but an actual fight with raised voices and hurtful words they'd both regret later, but could never take back. Damien accused Sienna of not understanding the pressure he was under, of not appreciating how hard he was working, of failing to see that everything he did was for their benefit. Sienna accused Damien of using work as an escape, of being afraid of the intimacy and vulnerability that a real marriage and a family required, of choosing his company over his wife and unborn child again and again and again. "Maybe we need some space," Sienna said finally, exhausted from crying and fighting and trying to make him understand. "Maybe you should go to Shanghai. Stay as long as you need. And while you're gone, I'll figure out if I can keep doing this. What does that mean? It means I'm 3 months pregnant. On bed rest, scared out of my mind that I'm going to lose our baby. And my husband keeps choosing board meetings over me. It means I'm starting to wonder if we made a mistake. Damien went very still. You're talking about divorce. I'm talking about reality. You're already gone, Damien. You're already not here. All I'm doing is acknowledging what's already true. He left for Shanghai that night. They were still angry with each other, still hurt, still unable to bridge the gap that had opened between them. Instead of a few days, the trip stretched into 3 weeks. Legal complications, government regulations, endless meetings that somehow all required Damien's personal attention. When he finally came home, something fundamental had shifted. The easy affection they'd once shared, the casual touches, the shared jokes, the comfortable silences, all of it was replaced by polite distance. They slept in the same bed, but might as well have been on different continents. They said, "I love you," out of habit, but the words felt hollow. They moved around each other like roommates instead of partners. Sienna was 6 months pregnant when she woke up one morning to an empty house. No note, no text, nothing. Hours later, she got a brief message in NYC. Back Friday. That was when Sienna realized something devastating. She was already a single mother. Whether she stayed married to Damien or not, she would be raising this baby, essentially alone. The only question was whether she wanted to remain in a marriage where she felt invisible and unvalued, or start fresh and at least maintain her dignity. She spent the days he was gone in New York thinking deeply about her situation. She loved Damien. She still loved the man he'd been when they got married. But that man seemed to have been replaced by someone else. Someone who valued success over relationships. Someone who measured his worth in dollars and deals instead of connections and commitments. When Damien returned on Friday, Sienna was waiting. She'd made a decision, and she needed to say it out loud before she lost her nerve. "We need to talk," she said, before he could even set down his luggage. They sat in their expensive living room, surrounded by furniture. Designers had chosen because neither of them had time for such things. The house was beautiful and cold and empty, much like their marriage had become. "I can't do this anymore," Sienna said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "I can't be married to someone who's never really here. Our baby deserves better than a father who's always distracted. I deserve better than a husband who sees his family as an obligation rather than a joy." Damien looked stunned. "You're talking about divorce?" "Sienna, you're 6 months pregnant with our child." "Exactly," Sienna replied. "I'm 6 months pregnant, and you haven't been to a single doctor's appointment since the emergency. You don't know if we're having a boy or a girl because you haven't asked. You haven't felt the baby kick because you're never here when it happens. You haven't asked about names or nursery colors or anything else because you're too busy building your empire. That's not—" "You're already absent," Sienna interrupted. "All I'm doing is making it official. At least if we're divorced, I won't keep hoping you'll choose us. I won't keep waiting for you to remember we exist." They talked for hours. Damien made promises. He would cut back on travel, prioritize family time, Be more present. Sienna wanted desperately to believe him, but she'd heard these promises before, and they never lasted more than a week or two. I need to see real change, Sienna said finally. Not promises, but actual consistent presence. Can you honestly tell me you can do that? Damien was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his honesty was brutal. I don't know. The company is at a critical point. The decisions I make in the next 6 months will determine whether Crosstech becomes a major player or just another failed startup that couldn't scale. I can't just walk away from that, but you can walk away from us. That's not what I'm saying. Yes, it is, Sienna said softly. You just don't realize it. They agreed to a trial separation. Sienna would move back to Portland to be near her mother and younger sister. The plan was for Damien to visit regularly, to stay involved in the pregnancy, to use this time apart to figure out if their marriage could be saved. But both of them knew the truth. The marriage was already over. They were just going through the motions, unable to admit out loud that they failed at the most important thing they'd ever tried to build together. Sienna packed her things, not the expensive clothes and jewelry that Damien's money had bought, but the things that actually mattered. Photos from their wedding, books Damien had given her when they were poor and happy, the stuffed rabbit she'd bought at a garage sale, intending to give it to their baby someday. Her mother drove down from Portland to help with the move. Damien was conveniently on a business call when they loaded the car. He came out to say goodbye, his phone still pressed to his ear, his mind clearly somewhere else. I'll call you tonight, he said, kissing Sienna's forehead quickly. We'll figure this out. But Sienna knew better. As she drove away from that beautiful house, watching it disappear in the rearview mirror, she knew she was leaving for good. That house had never been a home. It had been a showpiece, a symbol of success, a place to display wealth, but not to build a life. Real home had been that cramped studio apartment where they'd been poor and happy, where they'd cooked cheap meals together and laughed at stupid things and made love with a tenderness that had nothing to do with circumstances and everything to do with choice. That home was gone, and Sienna was starting to accept that maybe the man she'd loved was gone too, replaced by someone who looked like Damien, cross but whose heart had been traded in for stock options and board meetings and the relentless pursuit of more. Portland welcomed her back with rain and familiar streets and her mother's comfortable house. Sienna moved into her old bedroom, now set up as a guest room, and tried to figure out how to be 6 months pregnant and essentially separated from her husband. Damien called that night, like he'd promised. They talked for 15 minutes about logistics, when he'd visit, how they'd handle doctor's appointments, what the plan was moving forward. But they didn't talk about feelings or fears or the future they'd once imagined together. I love you, Damien said before hanging up. Love you too, Sienna replied automatically. But love wasn't enough. It had never been enough. Love without presence was just a pretty word that meant nothing. What Sienna didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, as she lay in her childhood bedroom, one hand resting on her growing belly, was that things were about to get so much worse, that in just 6 weeks, her water would break prematurely and she'd give birth alone, while Damien was on the other side of the world, that her tiny baby boy would fight for his life in a NICU, while his father scrambled to catch flights home. And what she really didn't know was that after a few brief weeks of present. Fatherhood. Damien would slip right back into his old patterns. That his promises would prove as empty as everything else. That the man she'd loved would become the man who'd someday throw money. Her in an airport, like she was garbage, without even recognizing her face. Do you think people can really change? Or do they just become more of who they've always been deep down? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story is hitting you in the heart, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. The pain ripped through Sienna's abdomen like lightning. She was 7.5 months pregnant, helping her mother plant tomatoes in the backyard garden. The doctor had approved light activity. Gentle movement was supposed to be good for her. But this wasn't gentle. This was sharp and wrong and terrifying. "Mom," Sienna gasped, dropping the trowel. "Something's wrong." Then she felt it, the gush of fluid soaking through her jeans. Her water had broken. 6 weeks too early. Her mother's face went white. Inside. "Now. I'm calling an ambulance." The next few hours blurred into nightmare. Paramedics, sirens, the hospital emergency room. Doctors and nurses surrounding her, speaking in urgent tones about fetal distress and premature labor and NICU preparation. "We need to deliver this baby now," the doctor said. "It's too early, but waiting is more dangerous." "My husband," Sienna managed through the pain. "I need to call my husband." They handed her a phone. She dialed Damien's number with shaking fingers, straight to voicemail. She tried again and again and again. "Please," she begged the universe, "please let him answer." But Damien was in Tokyo, negotiating a partnership that would expand Crosstech into the Asian market. His phone was off. He was in back-to-back meetings that couldn't be interrupted. He was 7,000 miles away, completely unreachable, while his wife was about to give birth to their child, 2 months premature. Sienna left frantic voicemails. "Damien, I'm at the hospital. The baby's coming. Please call me back. Please. I need you." Then the contractions intensified, and there was no more time for phone calls. Labor with a premature baby is different. Faster in some ways, more dangerous in others. Sienna's body pushed their son into the world with desperate urgency, as if trying to save him from some unseen threat. When he emerged, he didn't cry, didn't make a sound, just lay there, tiny and gray, and not breathing. "Code blue," someone called, and suddenly the room was chaos. They whisked the baby away before Sienna even got a good look at him. Medical personnel rushed around, doing things she couldn't see, saying things she couldn't process. Her mother held her hand and cried. Sienna just lay there, numb with shock, unable to fully understand what was happening. A neonatologist came in 15 minutes later, her expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Cross, your son is alive. He's in the NICU. He weighs 4 pounds 3 ounces, and he's not able to breathe on his own yet. We have him on a ventilator. Can I see him?" "Soon. Right now, we're stabilizing him. But I need to be honest with you. The next 72 hours are critical. He's very premature. His lungs aren't fully developed. We're doing everything we can, but..." She didn't finish that sentence. She didn't have to. They let Sienna see her son 2 hours later, wheeled her into the NICU in a wheelchair because she was still too weak to walk. Nothing could have prepared her for what she saw. Her baby, her tiny, perfect baby, lay in a clear plastic box, surrounded by machines. Tubes ran into his nose and mouth. Wires connected to his chest. Monitors beeped steadily, tracking every heartbeat, every breath that the ventilator forced into his underdeveloped lungs. He was so small, so impossibly small. His entire body would have fit in Sienna's 2 hands. His skin was almost translucent, veins visible beneath the surface. His eyes were closed, his little fists clenched tight against a world he'd entered too soon. "He's a fighter," the nurse said kindly. "See those strong hands? He's holding on." Sienna couldn't touch him, couldn't hold him, could only press her hand against the plastic isolette and cry. "You need a name for the paperwork," her mother said gently. Sienna looked at her son, this tiny warrior fighting for every breath. "Felix," she said. "It means lucky, fortunate, because he's going to survive. He has to." Damien got Sienna's messages 8 hours after Felix was born. He'd just come out of his final meeting, exhausted and ready to head back to his hotel, when he finally turned on his phone. 37 missed calls, dozens of texts, and 1 voicemail that made his blood run cold. He called back immediately, hands shaking so badly he almost dropped his phone. "Sienna, I just got your messages. What happened? Are you okay? Is the baby—" "We have a son," Sienna said, her voice flat with exhaustion and something else. Something that might have been resentment. "He was born premature. He's in the NICU fighting for his life. And you weren't here." The words hit Damien like a physical blow. "I'm getting on the next flight. I'll be there as soon as I can. Sienna, I'm so sorry. My phone was off. I was in meetings. I didn't know." "You never know," Sienna interrupted quietly, "because you're never here when things actually matter. That's not fair. Our son was born 8 hours ago, and you didn't even know he existed. You think that's fair?" Damien couldn't answer that, because she was right. He'd been so focused on the Tokyo deal, so consumed with expansion plans and partnership negotiations, that he'd silenced everything else, including the possibility that his pregnant wife might need him. "I'm coming," he said again. "Just hang on. I'll be there." But getting from Tokyo to Portland wasn't instantaneous. Flight connections, delays, long hours sitting in airport terminals, burning with guilt and fear, imagining his son dying before he even got to meet him. It took 36 hours. 36 hours while Felix fought for his life, hooked up to machines that breathed for him and monitored his failing systems. 36 hours while Sienna sat by his isolette, singing to him softly, begging him to keep fighting. When Damien finally burst through the hospital doors, unshaven and wild-eyed from lack of sleep and panic, Sienna was in the NICU. He found her there, one hand pressed against the plastic, talking to their son in a whisper. "Sienna." She turned slowly, looked at him with eyes that held no warmth. "You made it. I came as fast as I could. I'm so sorry. I should have been here. I should have." "You should have been here for the past 7 months," Sienna said. "But you weren't. So why would today be any different?" Damien didn't have an answer for that, either. Instead, he looked past her, to the isolette, to the tiny baby, connected to more machines than seemed possible. "That's our son?" "That's Felix." Damien walked slowly to the isolette. each step feeling like moving through water. When he got close enough to really see, something inside him cracked wide open. His son, his beautiful, tiny, fragile son, fighting for every breath, covered in tubes and wires, born 2 months early because Damien hadn't been there to keep Sienna calm, to reduce her stress, to be the partner he'd promised to be. Tears streamed down Damien's face. He pressed one finger gently against the plastic, wishing he could touch Felix's impossibly small hand. "He's perfect," Damien whispered. "Sienna, he's perfect. He's a fighter," Sienna replied, her voice softening slightly. "The doctors say the next few days will tell us everything. Either his lungs will develop enough to breathe on his own, or—" She couldn't finish that sentence. They stood there together, united by love for this tiny human they'd created, even as the distance between them stretched wider than ever. For 3 weeks, Damien stayed in Portland. He canceled meetings, delegated responsibilities, told his board that he'd return when his son was stable and not a moment before. Those 3 weeks were the most present he'd been in years. He learned the NICU routine, the scheduled feedings, the careful handling of a premature infant, the constant monitoring of vital signs. He learned how to hold Felix carefully, supporting his tiny head, watching for signs of distress. He read to his son from books about science and technology, his deep voice rumbling softly in the quiet NICU. He talked to Felix about all the things they'd do together someday, the places they'd go, the adventures they'd have, the life Damien would give him. Felix grew stronger each day. His weight increased ounce by precious ounce. His lungs developed, learning to function without quite so much help from the machines. Slowly, gradually, tubes were removed. Monitors were disconnected. The day Felix was discharged from the hospital was one of the happiest of Sienna's life. She dressed him in a tiny outfit that still hung loosely on his small frame. She buckled him carefully into the car seat they'd bought. She cried with relief as they drove away from the hospital that had been his home for the first 3 weeks of his life. Damien was right there through all of it, present and engaged in ways he hadn't been since before Crosstech's success. Sienna allowed herself to hope. Maybe Felix's birth had changed everything. Maybe the man she'd married was still in there somewhere, just waiting for the right reason to resurface. For a few more weeks, it seemed like maybe her hope wasn't misplaced. Damien stayed in Portland, working remotely when absolutely necessary, but otherwise devoting himself to learning how to be a father and a husband. They took turns with night feedings, sitting together in the dim nursery at 3 a.m, watching Felix eat and sleep and grow. They marveled at tiny milestones. The first time he opened his eyes wide and looked around. The first time he gripped Damien's finger with surprising strength. The first real smile that might have been gas, but felt like magic. In those quiet moments, Sienna would look at Damien and see glimpses of the man she'd married. The one who'd danced with her at their park wedding. The one who'd held her close in their cramped apartment and promised that together they could get through anything. "Maybe we can make this work," she said one night, leaning against Damien's shoulder as they watched Felix sleep in his bassinet. "We will make this work," Damien replied, kissing her forehead. "I promise, Sienna. Things are going to be different now. I see what matters. It's this. It's us. It's Felix. Everything else is just noise." Sienna wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But 6 weeks after Felix's discharge, The phone calls from Crosstech's board started becoming more insistent. There were problems that required Damien's personal attention. A security breach that threatened customer data. A potential hostile takeover attempt by a competitor. Major investors threatening to pull their funding if Damien didn't return to active leadership immediately. The pressure mounted. Every day, more urgent calls. More desperate emails. More board members explaining that the company was in crisis, and only Damien could fix it. "I have to go back," Damien told Sienna one evening, the guilt evident in his voice. "Just for a few days. Just to handle the immediate crisis. Then I'll come right back." "Just a few days," Sienna repeated, and heard the bitterness in her own voice. "I know what you're thinking, but this is different. This, a real emergency. If I don't handle this, everything we've built could collapse. And then, what would we have?" "We'd have each other," Sienna said. "But you've never understood. That's enough." Damien left for California the next day, promising to return in 3 or 4 days maximum. 3 days became 2 weeks. 2 weeks became a month. Damien would fly back to Portland for brief weekends, exhausted and stressed, holding Felix but with his mind clearly elsewhere. Then he'd fly out again, back to the endless demands of running a company that seemed determined to consume every moment of his life. By the time Felix was 4 months old, the pattern was firmly reestablished. Damien was an absent father and a distant husband, present in theory, gone in practice. Sienna found herself struggling with postpartum depression, a dark, heavy fog that made even simple tasks feel overwhelming. Getting out of bed became an act of willpower. Caring for Felix, though she loved him desperately, sometimes felt like more than she could handle. She reached out to Damien multiple times, explaining that she needed help, that she was barely holding things together, that she needed her husband to be there, really there, not just visiting on weekends like a distant relative. "I'll come up next weekend," Damien promised during one phone call. "We'll figure this out together. I'll take some time off, and we'll get you the support you need." But that weekend, Crosstech's IPO launched, the initial public offering that would take the company public and make Damien a billionaire several times over. He called Sienna from the New York Stock Exchange floor, celebration and champagne corks popping in the background. "We did it," he exclaimed, his voice nearly drowned out by the noise. The stock opened at $60 a share. "Sienna, we're worth over $3 billion. Can you believe it? Everything we've worked for?" Sienna sat on her mother's couch, unwashed and exhausted after being up all night with Felix, who was going through a terrible bout of colic. She hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a time in days. She'd been crying on and off all morning because the darkness in her head was getting harder to fight. And on the other end of the phone, her husband was celebrating becoming a billionaire. "Congratulations," Sienna said flatly. "We should celebrate. I'll fly up tomorrow, and we'll—" "Don't bother." "What?" I said, "Don't bother coming up. You made your choice, Damien. You've been making it over and over for months now. Your company is more important than your family. Your success matters more than your son. Your billions mean more to you than I do." "That's not fair," Damien protested, but his voice was already fading against the celebration noise. "Everything I've done has been for you," Sienna interrupted. "Not us. You, your dreams, your ambition, your empire. I'm done pretending otherwise." She hung up, and in that moment, sitting in her mother's house with her screaming, baby and her untreated depression, and her husband, 700 miles away celebrating billions while she could barely function. Sienna knew with devastating clarity that her marriage was over. Not dying, not struggling. Dead, the man she'd loved was gone, replaced by someone who'd chosen power over presence, success over family, billions over the one thing that should have mattered most. So, tell me, when is success too expensive? When does ambition cost more than it's worth? And can someone who's forgotten what really matters ever find their way back? Comment your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter, where everything gets even worse. The divorce papers arrived by courier on a Thursday afternoon. Damien stared at them for a long time, unable to quite process what he was seeing. Petition for dissolution of marriage, filed by Sienna Vale Cross, requesting full physical custody of Felix Damien Cross, minor child, age 4 months. 4 months! His son was 4 months old, and Damien couldn't remember the last time he'd actually held him. 3 weeks? A month? The weekends blurred together, each one consumed by crisis management, damage control, and the endless demands of running a newly public company. Mr. Cross? His assistant, Veronica, stood in the doorway of his office, concern on her face. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Tell them I'll be late. But, sir, I said I'll be late, Damien snapped, then immediately felt guilty for his tone. Sorry. Just give me some time. Veronica left quietly. Damien picked up his phone and called Sienna's number. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice cool and distant. You got the papers. We can work this out, Damien said. We don't need lawyers. We can't work this out, Sienna interrupted. We've been trying to work this out for over a year now. It's not working. You're not going to change. And I'm done waiting for you to choose us. That's not fair. I've been trying. Have you? Really? When's the last time you saw your son, Damien? The question hung in the air. Damien tried to remember. 3 weeks ago? When I flew up for that weekend? 4 weeks. It's been 4 weeks. Felix is learning to roll over. He started laughing at silly noises. He reaches for toys now. And you don't know any of that. Because you're not here. I'm building something for him. For us. Don't you understand that? Everything I'm doing is for you, Sienna said tiredly. Stop pretending it's for us. You love your company more than you've ever loved your family. That's fine. That's your choice. But I'm not going to force Felix to grow up with a father who treats him like an obligation. He's my none. Then act like it. The call ended. Damien sat in his corner office, 43 floors above San Francisco, surrounded by the trappings of success. Original artwork on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the bay, custom furniture that cost more than his first car. Everything he dreamed of having when he was that broke graduate student, eating ramen and dreaming big dreams. But sitting there with divorce papers in his hand and his wife's words echoing in his ears, none of it felt like victory. His lawyer advised, settling quickly and generously. You're a billionaire now, Mr. Cross. You can afford to be magnanimous. Give her what she wants. Custody, child support, a settlement that lets her live comfortably. Make this easy, and it'll be over fast. So that's what Damien did. He agreed to Sienna's terms, without argument. Full custody for her, with visitation rights for him that they both knew he'd rarely exercise. A financial settlement that would give Sienna enough money to never worry about bills again. Child support payments that would cover Felix's every need, and then some. It felt like the right thing to do, like he was being fair, even noble, taking responsibility financially, if not emotionally. The divorce was finalized in record time, 6 weeks from filing to decree. Damien signed the papers, his lawyer put in front of him, barely reading them. He was too busy managing Crosstech's explosive post-IPO growth to pay close attention to personal matters. His assistant arranged for the settlement funds to be transferred to Sienna's account. Done and done. Marriage over. Obligations met. Time to move forward. Except 3 weeks later, Sienna's lawyer called Damien's lawyer with a very different story. The settlement funds were never deposited, the lawyer said, confused. The transaction shows as reversed. And when we tried to follow up, your legal team informed us that the divorce decree is being challenged on procedural grounds. Damien's lawyer looked into it. What he found made his face go pale. Crosstech's legal team, in consultation with the board of directors, had reviewed the divorce settlement. They'd become very concerned about how it might affect Damien's controlling interest in the company. Giving Sienna that much money could have implications for stock distribution, tax implications, shareholder lawsuits. So without consulting Damien directly, just operating under the broad authority he'd given them to handle legal matters, they'd filed motions to invalidate the divorce decree on technical filing errors. They'd frozen the settlement funds. They'd launched a legal campaign arguing that Sienna's demands were excessive and would harm the company's shareholders. You need to shut this down immediately, Damien told his lawyer. This is ridiculous. Pay her what we agreed to pay her. But it wasn't that simple. The board pushed back hard. These weren't just Damien's lawyers anymore. They were Crosstech's lawyers. They had a responsibility to protect the company and its shareholders. Challenging the settlement was their fiduciary duty. Let us handle this, they advised. We'll negotiate something reasonable. Something that doesn't expose the company to risk. Damien was drowning in other responsibilities. The Asian expansion was consuming 18 hours a day. Major regulatory issues in Europe. A product launch that was behind schedule. A competitor trying to poach his top engineers. He told himself that his lawyers knew what they were doing, that they'd work it out with Sienna's lawyers, that this was just standard legal maneuvering that would resolve itself eventually. He delegated the entire situation and moved on to the 100 other things demanding his attention. What Damien didn't know was that his legal team had also instructed his assistant to filter all communication from Sienna. The board had decided, without Damien's explicit approval, but under his general policy of protecting the company, that any contact between Damien and his ex-wife needed to go through legal channels. So when Sienna called, she got voicemail. When she emailed, the messages were redirected to the legal team. When she tried to reach him through Crosstech's main office, she hit a wall of administrative assistants following orders to block her access. From Sienna's perspective, Damien had become completely unreachable. The man who'd promised her a generous settlement was now using his billions to fight her legally, refusing to even speak to her directly. From Damien's perspective, he'd settled the divorce fairly and moved on. Sienna had her lawyer. He had his, and they'd work out the details. He assumed everything was progressing normally. Neither of them knew that a wall of legal and administrative barriers had risen between them, turning what should have been a straightforward divorce into a nightmare. Sienna tried everything. She called Damien's personal number dozens of times. She sent emails explaining that she wasn't getting the settlement funds, that she needed child support for Felix, that she was running out of money for lawyers and couldn't afford to fight him. But every message vanished into the void, intercepted by assistants following orders, reviewed by lawyers who saw her not as Damien's ex-wife, but as a potential threat to shareholder value. Her own lawyer tried to negotiate, but Crosstech's legal team played hardball, dragging things out, demanding documentation, filing motion after motion. They weren't interested in settling quickly or fairly. They were interested in protecting the company's interests at all costs. This could take years to resolve. Sienna's lawyer told her regretfully, "And I have to be honest, I don't think you can afford the legal fees that long. Mr. Cross has essentially unlimited resources. You don't." Sienna sat in that lawyer's office, Felix squirming in her arms, and felt her world collapse. She'd entered this divorce assuming she'd have financial security to rebuild her life. Instead, she was looking at mounting legal bills, no income, and a battle she couldn't possibly win. Then tragedy struck again. Sienna's mother had a heart attack while gardening on a Sunday afternoon. Massive and sudden and fatal before the ambulance even arrived. The woman who'd been Sienna's rock through everything. Her pregnancy, Felix, premature birth, the divorce, the depression, was suddenly gone. The grief was crushing. But worse than the grief was the logistics. Sienna had to plan a funeral she couldn't afford, had to deal with her mother's estate. I had to discover that her mother's house, the place she and Felix had been living, was mortgaged to the hilt with medical bills from an old cancer scare. Once the estate was settled, there was nothing left. Actually worse than nothing. There were debts Sienna inherited along with her grief. Her younger sister Holly was supposed to help, but Holly was deep in her own struggles with addiction, borrowing money from Sienna she'd never repay, creating drama that Sienna had neither the time nor energy to manage. Within 6 months of her divorce, Sienna found herself with a 7-month-old baby, no home, no income, mounting legal bills, and funeral debt. She'd exhausted her meager savings. The legal battle with Damien had ground to a halt because she couldn't afford to continue it. She applied for welfare assistance, food stamps, housing programs, but the waiting lists were months long, and the system was overwhelmed. She stayed in cheap motels when she had enough money, sleeping in her car when she didn't. The postpartum depression she'd never properly treated deepened into something darker. Some mornings, Sienna could barely find the strength to get out of bed, but she had to, because Felix needed her. Felix, who was now crawling and babbling and developing into a real person with opinions and preferences. Felix, who deserved so much better than this precarious existence. Felix, who had a father worth billions, who'd apparently decided they weren't worth his time or money. Sienna tried one last time to reach Damien. She got through to Crosstech's main reception, convinced the operator it was an emergency, and left a message describing her situation. "Please," she said into the voicemail, "I'm not asking for myself. I'm asking for Felix. He's your son. He needs help. We need help. I don't care about the legal battles or the settlement. I just need enough to keep him fed and safe. Please, Damien. Please, just call me back." But that message like all the others, was intercepted by the legal team. They listened to it, noted it in their files, and never passed it along to Damien. As far as Damien knew, everything was fine. His lawyers were handling the divorce. Sienna had representation. The system was working as designed. He rarely thought about his ex-wife anymore, and to his shame, thought about Felix even less. Sometimes late at night, when he couldn't sleep despite his exhaustion, Damien would remember holding his newborn son in the NICU, would wonder what Felix looked like now, whether he was walking yet, what his first words had been. But those thoughts were painful, and Damien had learned long ago how to deal with pain. Work harder, stay busier, keep moving forward without looking back. Meanwhile, Sienna was discovering just how invisible homeless people truly are. How people's eyes slide right past you. How you become less than human in strangers' estimation. How quickly you can fall from middle class to desperate with just a few pieces of bad luck stacked on top of each other. She kept Felix clean and fed and safe, sacrificing her own needs completely. She read to him every night from library books, taught him his colors and numbers, made sure he knew he was loved, even when she couldn't give him material things. "Where's Daddy?" Felix asked when he was old enough to notice that other kids had fathers. "Daddy lives far away," Sienna would answer carefully. "He has important work to do." It was a lie. But what else could she say? That his father had abandoned them? That billions mattered more than his own child? That some people valued success over family? Years passed. Felix grew from a baby to a toddler to a bright, curious 5-year-old. Sienna aged prematurely, her hair going gray, her face lined with worry, moving with the weariness of someone carrying too much weight for too long. She'd long since given up on the legal battle, couldn't afford lawyers, couldn't fight someone with unlimited resources. She'd tried reaching out to Damien through various channels over the years, but every attempt hit the same administrative wall. Eventually, she stopped trying. It was too painful to keep being rejected, too demoralizing to face the reality that the man she'd loved had completely erased her from his life. She focused on survival instead, getting through each day, keeping Felix safe and as happy as possible, finding small moments of grace in an otherwise brutal existence. She never expected to see Damien cross again, until that day in Chicago O'Hare, when she was panhandling for enough money to buy Felix dinner, and a billionaire in an expensive suit collided with her and didn't even recognize her face. So now you know how it happened, how love turned to indifference, how promises became lies, how a man could walk away from his own family and never look back. But here's what you don't know yet. What's about to happen next will change everything. Because those phones that recorded Damien's cruelty, they're about to make him pay. Hit that subscribe button right now, because the next chapter is where justice starts coming due. The video had 17 million views and counting. Damien Cross sat in his Manhattan penthouse at 2 a.m, watching his own face on the screen, watching himself throw money at a homeless woman, watching the contempt in his expression, watching the crowd's reaction, the gasps, the shock. The phones immediately pulled out to record. Billionaire CEO humiliates homeless woman at O'Hare. Red pulled out to record. Billionaire CEO humiliates homeless woman at O'Hare, read the headline. The comments section was a war zone. This is why people hate the rich. Disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. Someone find out who this woman is. She deserves better. Cancel this man. Cancel his company. Boycott everything he touches. His phone had been ringing non-stop for 6 hours. His PR team, his board members, major investors, everyone wanting to know what he was thinking, why he'd done it, how they were going to control this disaster. Crosstech stock had dropped 4% in after-hours trading. Sponsors were already pulling out of partnerships. The press was having a field day, digging into every aspect of his life, looking for more evidence that he was the monster this video suggested. Damien kept watching it, kept seeing himself through strangers' eyes. The expensive suit, the dismissive gesture, the way he'd stepped around that woman like she was garbage blocking his path. He didn't even remember her face. That was the worst part. He'd insulted her, humiliated her in front of dozens of people, and she was so completely forgettable to him that he couldn't even recall what she looked like. Just another homeless person, another obstacle, another inconvenience in his very important day. His PR director, Marcus, had been calling every 20 minutes with updates and strategies. We need to get ahead of this. Charitable donation to homeless shelters. Public apology. Maybe volunteer work. Get some photos of you serving food at a soup kitchen. We can turn this around, but we need to move fast. Damien had agreed to everything, whatever it took to make this go away. He had a company to run, a reputation to protect, shareholders who expected him to handle problems efficiently. This was just another problem. Embarrassing. Yes. Damaging, certainly, but manageable with the right strategy and enough money thrown at the right places. He closed his laptop and poured himself another scotch. Outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, New York City glittered with a million lights. Somewhere down there, people were living their lives, completely unaware of his existence. And somewhere, that homeless woman he'd insulted was probably sleeping in a shelter, equally unaware that she'd just become the center of a viral storm. Tomorrow, his team would spin this. They'd paint him as stressed and overworked, a good man who'd had one bad moment. They'd highlight all his charitable donations and his company's community programs. They'd humanize him until the public moved on to the next outrage. That's how it worked. That's how everything worked at this level. Damien finished his scotch and headed to bed, already thinking about the morning's damage control meetings. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know as he drifted off to sleep in his $8,000 mattress, was that someone had recognized the homeless woman's face. And that recognition was about to detonate his entire life. How quickly can success turn to ashes? How fast can a carefully built empire crumble when the truth comes out? Keep watching, because what's about to happen will shock you. 3,000 miles away in Portland, Oregon, a woman named Marina Chen was scrolling through her social media feed before bed. The video of Damien Cross popped up, already shared by dozens of her friends with angry commentary. Marina watched it once, then again, then a third time, leaning close to her phone screen, squinting at the homeless woman's face. No, it couldn't be. But the more Marina looked, the more certain she became. Those eyes, that profile, Even weathered by hardship and aged beyond her years, Marina would recognize that face anywhere. She'd gone to graduate school with Sienna Vale. They'd been in the social work program together, had volunteered at the same shelters, had shared dreams of changing the world through compassion and service. Marina had lost touch with Sienna years ago. Life got busy. People drifted apart, the way they always did. But she remembered Sienna getting married to some tech entrepreneur. Remembered Sienna leaving Portland to be with her husband in California, full of hope about the future they'd build together. Now that same woman was homeless, being humiliated by a billionaire in an airport. Marina screenshot the video and started digging. It took less than an hour to confirm her suspicions. Public records showed that Sienna Vale had married Damien Cross 15 years ago. Divorce records from 6 years ago. Custody documents listing one minor child, Felix Damien Cross, now 5 years old. Marina's hands shook as she put the pieces together. The homeless woman in that video wasn't just some random person Damien Cross had insulted. She was his ex-wife, the mother of his child. And if Sienna was homeless, where was their son? Marina made a decision. She had a friend who worked as an investigative journalist for a major news outlet, someone who specialized in stories about corporate malfeasance and the ugly side of wealth. She sent the information over immediately, along with her own testimony about knowing Sienna in graduate school, about the kind, compassionate woman who dedicated her life to helping others, about how wrong it was that someone like that had ended up on the streets, while her billionaire ex-husband threw pocket change at her. The journalist, a sharp woman named Rachel Torres, started digging deeper. Public records, court documents, interviews with people who'd known both Damien and Sienna during their marriage. The story Rachel uncovered was explosive. A generous divorce settlement that had mysteriously been challenged and frozen. Years of legal battles that Sienna couldn't afford to fight. A legal team that had weaponized the system to protect corporate interests over a woman and child. Rachel tracked down Sienna's former lawyer, who was still angry about the whole situation 6 years later. "They destroyed her," he said on record. Crosstech's lawyers used every trick in the book to drag things out and deny her what she was owed. And Damien Cross just let them do it. Either he didn't care enough to stop them, or he actively supported it. Either way, he abandoned his ex-wife and child to poverty while he built his billions. Rachel found people who'd worked at the shelters where Sienna and Felix had stayed. Got testimonials about what kind of mother Sienna was. Devoted, loving, doing everything possible to give her son a good life, despite impossible circumstances. She tracked down Felix's kindergarten teacher from last year. "Brilliant child," the teacher said, "so kind and well-adjusted considering what he's been through. His mother works multiple jobs but never misses pickup. You can see how much she loves him. It's heartbreaking that they're in such a precarious situation." Rachel even found old photos from Damien and Sienna's wedding, compared them to recent photos of Damien at charity galas and investor conferences. Always impeccably dressed, always surrounded by wealth and power. Then she got a photo of 5-year-old Felix from someone at the shelter. The resemblance to young Damien was undeniable. Same dark hair, same gray eyes, same facial structure. This was clearly his son. The article Rachel published 3 days after the video went viral was devastating. Billionaire mocked his own ex-wife while she raised his son in poverty, read the headline. The story detailed everything: the marriage, the divorce, the legal battles, the child Damien had essentially abandoned. Social media exploded. If people had been angry about the airport video, they were furious about this. The story hit every major news outlet within hours. Cable news shows discussed it. Think pieces were written about wealth inequality and deadbeat fathers and corporate greed. Where is Damien Cross's son? Became a trending hashtag. People demanded answers. How could a billionaire let his own child live in homeless shelters? What kind of monster did that? Crosstech's stock went into free fall. Major clients started terminating contracts. The board held emergency meetings. Sponsors didn't just pull out. They publicly denounced any association with Damien. Damien's phone rang constantly. His lawyers, his PR team, board members screaming about shareholder value. Investors demanding he fix this immediately or resign. But Damien couldn't answer any of them because he was sitting in his office, reading Rachel Torres's article for the 5th time, feeling his entire world collapse around him. Sienna, the homeless woman, had been Sienna. He pulled up the airport video again, watched it with new eyes, looked past the weathered appearance and the gray hair and the obvious poverty, looked at her eyes, her hazel eyes that he'd once loved, that had looked at him on their wedding day with such hope and trust. He'd looked right at her and seen nothing, had insulted her, dismissed her, treated her like garbage, his own ex-wife, the mother of his child, and Felix. God, Felix. Damien searched for the photo Rachel had included in her article. His son, 5 years old, looking so much like Damien himself had looked at that age, that it was almost like looking at old photos of himself. 5 years of his son's life gone. Missed first steps, first words, first day of school. All the moments that mattered, all the experiences that built a childhood, Damien had missed every single one because he'd been too busy building an empire, too consumed with success to notice his own family slipping away, too focused on billions to remember what actually mattered. His assistant knocked on his office door. "Mr. Cross, the board is demanding a statement. The press is camped outside the building. You need to get out," Damien said quietly. "Sir, the situation?" "I said get out." Damien roared, and his assistant fled. Damien sat alone in his corner office, surrounded by all his trophies of success. The awards on his walls, the expensive art, the view of Manhattan that he'd worked so hard to earn. All of it meaningless, all of it worthless compared to what he'd lost. He called his head of legal, his voice cold with rage. "Tell me about the divorce settlement. Tell me everything." What he learned made him want to put his fist through the wall. His legal team had blocked Sienna's settlement without his explicit knowledge. They'd challenged the divorce, frozen the funds, dragged her through years of legal battles, all under the broad authority he'd given them to protect the company. "We were following standard procedure," his lawyer protested, "protecting shareholder interests. You signed off on our authority to—" "I signed off on protecting the company," Damien interrupted. "Not on destroying my son's mother. Not on making my own child homeless. With all due respect, Mr. Cross, you delegated these matters to us. You never asked for updates. You never wanted to be involved in the details. You can't blame us for doing what we thought was in the company's best interests. And there it was, the horrible truth. He'd delegated his family, like they were just another business problem, had signed papers without reading them, had given his lawyers authority to handle things, and then never followed up. He'd been so consumed with running Crosstech that he'd essentially handed over control of his personal life to people who saw Sienna and Felix as threats to shareholder value rather than human beings he'd once promised to love. "Call my assistant," Damien said. "I want to see every message Sienna sent in the past 6 years. Every call she made. Every email. Everything that was filtered or redirected. I want it all." "Mr. Cross, I don't think." "Do it. Now." An hour later, Damien sat staring at a file containing hundreds of messages. Voicemails from Sienna, her voice growing more desperate with each one. Emails explaining her situation. Pleas for help with Felix, requests just to talk, to work something out, to find a solution that didn't involve lawyers and courts. All of it blocked. All of it redirected to legal teams who saw her as an adversary rather than a person. All of it kept from Damien because his own staff had decided he was too important to be bothered with such matters. One voicemail in particular made Damien's hands shake as he listened to it. Sienna's voice cracking with desperation. "Please, Damien. I'm not asking for myself. I'm asking for Felix. He's your son. He needs help. We need help. I don't care about the legal battles or the settlement. I just need enough to keep him fed and safe. Please just call me back." That message was 4 years old. Felix would have been 1 year old. His son had needed help, and Damien had never even known because his own systems had kept him isolated from the truth. Damien stood up and walked to his window, looked out at the city below, thought about Sienna out there somewhere, probably in a shelter, probably terrified about what this media attention would do to her already precarious existence. Thought about Felix, his son, who'd grown up not knowing his father because that father had been too busy chasing success to notice his own family falling apart. His phone buzzed. Another call from the board. Another crisis to manage. Another problem requiring his immediate attention. Damien ignored it. Let it ring. For the first time in years, something mattered more than Crosstech. More than the stock price. More than the board's demands. He needed to find Sienna and Felix. Needed to see with his own eyes what his negligence had cost them. Needed to face the consequences of every choice he'd made for the past 6 years. "Cancel everything," Damien told his assistant through the intercom. "Every meeting, every call, every appearance. I don't care what it is or who it's with. Cancel it all." "Sir, the board meeting. They can meet without me, or they can wait. I don't care which. But Mr. Cross, the company will survive," Damien said. "It's survived this long without me actually paying attention to what matters. It can survive a few more days." He grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator. Had no idea where he was going yet, but he'd figure it out. He'd hire investigators. He'd track down shelter records. He'd use every resource at his disposal to find his ex-wife and son. And he'd face them. Face what he'd done. Face what he'd become. Face the wreckage of everything he'd destroyed in his pursuit of success. So here's the question. When you finally see the truth about yourself, is it too late to change? When you realize you've become the villain in your own story, can you ever be the hero again? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And make sure you're subscribed because the next chapter is where Damien finally comes face to face with the family he abandoned. The shelter was called New Beginnings, located in a converted warehouse in Chicago's South Side. Damien's private investigator had tracked Sienna there within 36 hours. Apparently, she'd been staying there on and off for the past 3 years whenever she couldn't afford a motel room. The staff knew her, knew Felix, knew their story, even if they didn't know all the details. Now Damien stood outside the building at 7 in the evening, his expensive car looking completely out of place on this street. He'd come alone despite his security team's protests. Some things you had to face without backup. His hands were shaking. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. In a few minutes, he was going to see his son for the first time in 5 years. Was going to face his ex-wife after humiliating her in front of millions of people. What do you even say? How do you apologize for abandoning your child? How do you explain becoming a monster? Damien forced himself to walk through the front doors. The shelter's interior was clean but worn. Tile floors that had seen better days. Fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. The smell of industrial cleaner and something cooking in a kitchen somewhere. A volunteer at the front desk looked up, did a double take when she recognized his face. Mr. Cross? I'm looking for Sienna Vale and my son, Felix. I was told they're staying here. The volunteer's expression hardened immediately. They are? But I'm not sure they want to see you. I understand that, but I need to try. Please. The volunteer studied him for a long moment, clearly debating whether to call security or give him a chance. Finally, she picked up a phone and made a call. Spoke quietly. Hung up. She's in the common room. Down that hallway. Last door on the left. But Mr. Cross? If you upset that boy, if you make this worse for them, you'll have a lot of angry people to deal with. Felix and his mother are loved here. We protect our own. I'm not here to make things worse, Damien said quietly. I'm here to try to fix what I broke. He walked down the hallway, each step feeling like moving through concrete. Other residents passed him in the hall, doing double takes, whispering to each other. His face had been all over the news for days. Everyone here probably knew exactly who he was and what he'd done. The common room was large and open, with mismatched furniture arranged in conversational groups. A television played in one corner. A few card tables were set up for games. Children's toys were scattered near a play area. And there, sitting on a worn couch with a book open in her lap, was Sienna. Damien's breath caught, even knowing it had been her in that airport video. Seeing her in person was different. She looked so much older than her 31 years. Her hair was more gray than dark now. Her face was lined with worry and hardship. She wore clothes that had clearly come from donation bins. Clean but worn, functional but not fitted. But it was her, his wife, the woman he'd married in that park 15 years ago, the woman who'd believed in his dreams and supported his ambitions and loved him when he'd had nothing. And sitting on the floor near her feet, building something elaborate with plastic blocks, was a little boy with dark hair and gray eyes that were unmistakably Damien's own. Felix, Damien's son, 5 years old, completely absorbed in his building project, tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. He had Damien's eyes, Sienna's nose, and an expression of focused determination that reminded Damien painfully of himself. Sienna looked up and saw him standing there, froze. The book slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a thud that made Felix look up. "Mommy?" Felix's voice was high and sweet and innocent. "What's wrong?" Sienna recovered quickly, schooling her expression. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just surprised. Why don't you keep playing with your blocks while Mommy talks to this person?" Felix looked at Damien with open curiosity. "Who are you?" The question was so simple, but it shattered something in Damien's chest. His 5-year-old son didn't know him, didn't recognize him, had no idea that the man standing there was his father. Damien's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I'm Damien." "That's a funny name," Felix said, and went back to his blocks. Sienna stood up slowly, positioning herself between Damien and Felix. Protective, wary, her expression was carefully blank, but Damien could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was quiet, but hard as stone. "I need to talk to you. Please. Can we?" Damien gestured toward a corner of the room that was slightly more private. "Felix stays where I can, him?" "Of course. I just thought we need to talk about everything." Sienna looked at him for a long moment, then nodded curtly. She told Felix to stay right where he was and keep playing, that she'd be just over there where he could see her. They moved to the corner, stood facing each other with 5 years of damage between them. "I saw the video," Damien started. "I didn't know it was you. I swear, Sienna. I didn't recognize." "Stop," Sienna interrupted. "I don't care about the video. I don't care about your excuses. Why are you here?" "I saw the articles, the investigative reports. I learned what my legal team did, what they've been doing for years." "Sienna, I didn't know. I didn't know they were blocking your settlement. I didn't know you were trying to reach me. I didn't know you were homeless. I didn't know any of it." "You didn't want to know," Sienna corrected. "That's different. You delegated us, like we were just another business problem. You signed papers without reading them. You gave other people control over your son's life, because you couldn't be bothered to pay attention." "You're right," Damien said, and saw surprise flicker in her eyes. "You're absolutely right. I was so consumed with the company that I let everything else slip away. I thought my lawyers were handling things appropriately. I thought you had the settlement and had moved on. I don't know what I thought. I wasn't thinking at all. That's your problem, Damien. You never think about anything except cross-tech. Not me. Not Felix. Just your empire and your billions and your precious company." "I know." Damien's hands were shaking. "I know I failed you. Failed both of you. Failed in every way that matters. And I can't fix that. I can't go back and be the husband you needed, or the father Felix deserved. But I can try to make things right now." Sienna laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Make things right? With what? Money? You think you can just throw money at this and fix it?" "No, because that's what you always do, isn't it? You think money solves everything, but you can't buy back 5 years, Damien. You can't purchase the first time Felix walked, or the first word he spoke, or the hundreds of nights I sat with him while he was sick, wishing his father cared enough to be there. I want to meet him," Damien said, "properly. I want Felix to know who I am. Why? So you can waltz in here, play dad for 5 minutes, and then disappear again when the company needs you. No, I'm not going anywhere. I've stepped back from Cross-Tech, installed a new CEO. I'm staying until what? Sienna's eyes flashed with anger. Until the media moves on to the next scandal? Until your board convinces you to come back? Until being a father gets boring or inconvenient? Until Felix knows his father? Until you believe I've changed, however long that takes? I don't believe you. You've made promises before. They never last. I know, but I'm asking for a chance to prove this time is different. Sienna looked past him to where Felix was still playing with his blocks, completely unaware of the conversation happening. Do you have any idea what your absence has done to him? The questions he's asked that I couldn't answer? The times he's seen other kids with their fathers and wondered why his didn't want him? I always wanted him, Damien protested. You just wanted your company more. Actions matter, Damien, not intentions. And your actions have told Felix for 5 years that he's not important enough for your time. Damien felt tears burning his eyes. You're right about all of it. I chose wrong. I prioritized wrong. I failed in every way a father and husband can fail. But Sienna, please let me try to fix this. Not for me, for him. Felix deserves to know his father, even if that father is a disaster who doesn't deserve him. Sienna was quiet for a long moment, studying Damien's face. You really didn't know, did you? About the settlement being blocked, about us being homeless. I swear I didn't. I delegated it and moved on, assuming everything was handled. It's not an excuse. It's actually worse than an excuse. It's proof of how little I was paying attention to what actually mattered. And now? Now that the world knows what you did, now that it's affecting your precious company, suddenly you care. It's not about the company. The company can burn for all I care right now. It's about seeing that video and realizing I'd become someone I don't recognize. It's about learning I have a 5-year-old son who doesn't know my name. It's about understanding that I traded everything real for things that don't matter at all. Sienna looked at Felix again. The little boy had finished his block structure and was now trying to build something even taller. He kept glancing over at his mother, making sure she was still there, still watching. He's brilliant, Sienna said softly. Creative and kind and so smart it sometimes scares me. He teaches himself things from library books. He makes friends wherever we go. He's adaptable and resilient because he's had to be. But he deserves better than this life, Damien. He deserves stability and opportunities and a real home. Then let me give him that. Please. I don't trust you. No, I don't forgive you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to be his father. Whatever that looks like. Whatever boundaries you need. I'll take whatever you're willing to give. Sienna crossed her arms, her expression still guarded. Fine. You want to meet Felix? Really meet him? Tell him who you are. Yes. Then come with me. But Damien, if you hurt him, if you make promises you won't keep, if you disappear again, if you treat him like he's an inconvenience, I will. Make sure you never see him again. Legal team or no legal team, billions or no billions, I will disappear so completely you'll never find us. Do you understand? I understand. They walked back to where Felix was playing. He looked up as they approached, his gray eyes so much like Damien's own, studying them with curiosity. "Felix, sweetheart," Sienna said gently, kneeling beside him. "This man wants to talk to you. Is that okay?" Felix looked at Damien, then back at his mother, then at Damien again. "What do you want to talk about?" Damien knelt down too, bringing himself to Felix's eye level. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. This was his son, his child. 5 years of missed moments and lost opportunities. "I want to tell you who I am," Damien said, his voice thick with emotion. "My name is Damien Cross, and I'm your father." Felix's eyes went wide. He looked at Sienna for confirmation. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "You're my dad." Felix's voice was small and uncertain. "Yes. Where have you been?" The question was so direct, so innocent, so completely devastating. How did you explain abandonment to a 5-year-old? How did you justify years of absence? "I've been away," Damien said carefully, "working, building a company. But I made a terrible mistake. I thought work was more important than being here with you, and I was wrong. So wrong." Felix processed this with the seriousness of a much older child. "Did you know about me?" "Yes, I knew about you. I held you when you were born, when you were very tiny and sick. But then I left and I didn't come back like I should have. That was my fault. Not your mom's, not yours. Mine. Mommy said you had important work. Your mom was being kind. The truth is, nothing is more important than you. And it took me way too long to figure that out." Felix looked at his mother again, seeking guidance. Sienna was crying openly now, but she gave him an encouraging nod. "Can I show you what I built?" Felix asked suddenly, pointing to his block structure. The question was so normal, so childlike, so completely unexpected that Damien almost broke down completely. His son, after learning his absent father was standing in front of him, wanted to share his creation. "I'd love to see it," Damien managed. For the next 20 minutes, Felix showed Damien his block tower, explaining in serious detail how he'd engineered it to be stable, what each part represented, and what he planned to add next. He talked about a book he'd read about architecture, about wanting to build real buildings someday, about all the structures he'd designed in his head. Damien listened to every word, his heart breaking and healing simultaneously. His son was incredible, smart and creative and kind, and so much more than Damien deserved. When Felix finally ran out of things to say about his tower, he looked at Damien with those gray eyes and asked the question that mattered most. "Are you going to leave again?" Damien looked at Sienna, then back at Felix. "I hope not. I hope you and your mom will let me stay around. Let me be part of your life. But that's up to her, okay? Your mom gets to decide, because she's the one who's been taking care of you all along." Felix turned to Sienna. "Can he stay, Mommy?" Sienna wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. "We'll see, sweetheart. We'll take it slow and see what happens. Okay?" "Okay." Felix seemed satisfied with that answer. He turned back to Damien. "Do you want to help me build the next part?" And just like that, Damien Cross, billionaire CEO, tech innovator, one of the most powerful men in Silicon Valley, sat on the floor of a homeless shelter and helped his 5-year-old son build with plastic blocks. It was the most important thing he'd done in years. Can a man who's lost everything that matters find his way back? Can actions speak louder than years of neglect? And most importantly, can a child's heart be big enough to forgive what his father can never make right? Comment below with your thoughts, and don't miss the next chapter, where Damien starts the long road to redemption. 3 months had passed since that night. At the shelter, Damien stood in the doorway of a bright, spacious apartment on Chicago's North Side, watching Sienna unpack boxes in what would be Felix's bedroom. Natural light streamed through large windows. The hardwood floors gleamed. The walls were freshly painted in cheerful colors. It was a far cry from the shelter, from the motels, from the car they'd sometimes slept in when there was nowhere else to go. "The furniture arrives tomorrow," Damien said. "But I wanted you to see the space first. Make sure it works. If you want something different—" "It's perfect," Sienna interrupted, her voice still guarded but softer than it had been. "Felix is going to love having his own room." "Where is he?" "With Miss Carmen from the shelter. She's watching him for a few hours, while I get things organized here." Damien nodded. Miss Carmen had become something of a grandmother figure to Felix over the years. She'd volunteered to help with the transition, wanting to make sure her favorite little boy was settling into his new life okay. The apartment was in a safe neighborhood, with good schools, close to a park where Felix could play, near a library where Sienna could take him. Damien had paid for 3 years up front. No strings attached. No conditions. Just a stable home for his son and ex-wife, which was the absolute least he could do. He'd also set up a bank account in Sienna's name. Not the full settlement she'd been owed. That was still being worked out through proper legal channels, but enough for her to live comfortably. Enough that she didn't have to work 3 jobs just to feed her son. Enough that she could breathe for the first time in years. "I've been looking at jobs," Sienna said, still unpacking. "Real jobs, not just whatever I could find. There's a nonprofit here that works with homeless families. They're interested in hiring me to develop their youth programs." "That's great. That's what you've always wanted to do. It's what I was trained for." Before, she trailed off, but they both knew how that sentence ended. Before her life fell apart. Before she lost everything. Damien helped her unpack in silence for a while. They'd developed a careful routine over the past 3 months. Conversations that stayed surface level and practical. Interactions that focused on Felix's needs and logistics. Neither of them pushed for more than that. Because trust was earned slowly. Because words were cheap and actions were what mattered. Because Sienna had been burned too many times to believe promises anymore. So Damien showed up consistently, reliably, without fail. He'd been seeing Felix 3 times a week. Supervised visits at first, with Sienna always present. They'd meet at parks, or libraries, or child-friendly restaurants. Damien would spend hours with his son, learning who he was, what he loved, how his brilliant mind worked. Felix was cautious at first, polite but distant, calling Damien by his first name rather than Dad, testing whether this man who claimed to be his father would actually stick around or disappear like he had before. But Damien kept showing up, kept being present, kept proving through actions that this time was different. He'd started therapy, working with a counselor who specialized in workaholism and family dynamics, confronting the ways he'd used success as a substitute for real connection. Understanding how he'd become the kind of person who could walk past his own ex-wife without recognizing her. He'd stepped down as CEO of Crosstech, taking a board position instead. Let someone else run the daily operations, while he focused on what actually mattered. The stock had recovered from its initial crash. The company would survive without him at the helm. It turned out he wasn't quite as indispensable as he'd believed. "There's something I need to tell you," Sienna said, setting down the box she'd been unpacking. "About Felix." Damien's heart clenched. "Is he okay?" "He's fine. But he's been asking questions about why you weren't around before, about what happened between us, about whether you're going to leave again." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. Age-appropriate version, but the truth. That we loved each other once, but grew apart. That you made mistakes. That you're trying to do better now. That we don't know what the future looks like, but we're taking it one day at a time." "How did he handle it?" "Better than I expected. He's a resilient kid. But Damien..." Sienna finally looked at him directly. "He's starting to care about you. Starting to trust you. Starting to hope that maybe his dad will stick around this time." "I will stick around." "You say that now. But what happens when the novelty wears off? When being a father gets hard or boring or inconvenient? When Crosstech has a crisis that demands your attention? When there's thing more exciting than playing blocks with a 5-year-old? That's not going to happen. You can't promise that. Nobody can promise that." Damien took a deep breath. "You're right. I can't promise I'll be perfect. I'll probably mess up, make mistakes, have days where I'm tired or distracted or not at my best. But I can promise or won't disappear. I can promise I'll keep showing up even when it's hard. I can promise Felix will always be more important than any business deal or board meeting or investor call." Sienna studied his face for a long moment. "He asked if he could call you Dad?" The words hit Damien like a physical blow. "He did?" "Yesterday, after you left from your visit. He said, 'I think I want to call Damien my dad now. Is that okay?' And I told him it was up to him, but he should probably ask you first." Damien's eyes filled with tears. "What should I tell him?" "That's between you two. But Damien, if you accept that title, you have to earn it every single day. Being called dad is easy. Being one is hard." "I know." They finished unpacking the bedroom in silence. When they were done, Sienna grabbed her keys and headed for the door. "I'm going to pick up Felix. Do you want to come with me? We could grab dinner together. The three of us?" It wasn't much, just a casual invitation. But from Sienna, it was huge. She was letting him into more of Felix's life, trusting him incrementally, testing whether he'd continue to show up. "I'd like that," Damien said. They drove to Miss Carmen's house together, making small talk about logistics and Felix's upcoming kindergarten enrollment. When they arrived, Felix burst out the front door and ran toward them, his face lighting up when he saw both his parents together. "Mom!" "Damien!" He skidded to a stop in front of them, breathless and excited. "Miss Carmen taught me how to make cookies. We saved some for you." "That was sweet of you, buddy," Damien said, crouching down to Felix's level. Felix looked at him seriously. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Mom said I should ask you if..." Felix paused, suddenly shy. "If it's okay if I call you Dad now, instead of Damien." Damien felt his throat tighten. He glanced at Sienna, who was watching with tears in her eyes. Then he looked back at his son, this incredible child who somehow had the capacity to forgive what Damien could never make right. "You can call me whatever you want," Damien said carefully. "But Felix, if you call me Dad, I need you to understand something. That means I'm making you a promise. I promise I'll be there for you. At your school events and your birthday parties, when you're Joe, sick or sad or need help with homework. I promise I'll show up, even when it's hard or inconvenient. I promise you'll always be more important to me than anything else. Can I make that promise to you?" Felix thought about this with the seriousness he brought to everything. What if you break it? The question showed how much damage had already been done. How this 5-year-old had already learned that people don't always keep their promises. That fathers sometimes disappear. That love sometimes isn't enough. "Then you get to call me out on it," Damien said honestly. "And I'll have to figure out how to fix it and do better. But I'm going to try really hard not to break it. Okay?" Felix nodded slowly. Then he threw his arms around Damien's neck and whispered, "Okay, Dad." And just like that, Damien Cross, who'd built an $8 billion empire, who'd been on the cover of Forbes, who'd been named one of the most influential tech innovators of the decade, experienced the greatest success of his life. He was a father, really, truly a father. Not just biologically, but in the way that actually mattered. They went to dinner at a family-friendly restaurant where Felix ordered chicken, fingers, and talked nonstop about his upcoming first day at his new school. He was nervous, but excited, worried about making friends, but confident about the academic work. Damien and Sienna sat across from each other in the booth, their son between them, and for a moment, it almost felt like they were a real family, not broken or estranged or separated by years of mistakes. Just 3 people sharing a meal and talking about normal things. Later, after they'd dropped Sienna and Felix at their new apartment, Damien drove back to the hotel where he'd been staying for the past 3 months. It wasn't fancy. He'd deliberately chosen something modest, not wanting to flaunt wealth while his son's mother was transitioning from homelessness. He called his therapist, who'd told him to check in whenever he had breakthrough moments. "He called me Dad," Damien said, and heard his own voice crack. "My son called me Dad. How does that feel?" "Terrifying. I don't want to mess this up. I don't want to let him down again. So don't. Keep doing what you've been doing. Keep showing up. Keep being present. Keep proving that you've changed. What if I can't maintain it? What if I slip back into old patterns?" Then you course correct. Apologize. Do better. Nobody's perfect, Damien. The goal isn't perfection. It's consistency. It's being there more often than not. It's making your son feel valued and loved, even when you make mistakes. After the call, Damien sat in his hotel room and thought about the past 3 months, about watching Felix's face light up when he realized his dad had shown up again, about the careful trust growing in Sienna's eyes, about the slow, painful process of rebuilding what he'd destroyed. His phone buzzed with messages from the Crosstech board, issues that needed his input, decisions that apparently couldn't be made without him. The pull of his old life trying to drag him back. Damien looked at the messages for a long moment. Then he turned off his phone and went to bed. The board could wait. The company could wait. Everything could wait, because tomorrow morning he was taking Felix to register for kindergarten. He was going to hold his son's hand and walk him through those school doors, and be there for one of the many important moments he'd already missed. Tomorrow, he was going to keep being a father, and that was more important than anything else in the world. Have you ever gotten a second chance you didn't deserve? Have you ever had to earn back trust you'd carelessly thrown away? And, most importantly, do you think Damien's change is real? Or is he just playing the part until something more important comes along? Share your thoughts in the comments. And make sure you are subscribed, because the final chapters are where we discover if redemption is truly possible. 1 year later, Felix turned 6 years old. Damien stood in Sienna's apartment. No longer the apartment, but her home now, filled with personal touches and family photos and the comfortable clutter of real life, helping to hang streamers in the living room. Higher on the left, Sienna directed from below, hands on her hips. No, your other left. There. Perfect. Damien climbed down from the stepladder and surveyed their work. The apartment was transformed into a birthday wonderland. Balloons in every corner, a homemade banner that said, "Happy 6th Birthday, Felix," in bright colors. A table set up for cake and presents and party games. It was simple, nothing extravagant or over the top, just a celebration for a little boy and his friends from school. Guest list? Damien asked. 8 kids from his class, plus Miss Carmen and a few friends from the old shelter who wanted to see how Felix is doing. Should be manageable chaos rather than complete chaos. I'll take manageable. They'd developed an easy partnership over the past year. Not romantic. Sienna had made it clear she wasn't interested in revisiting that part of their relationship, but something warmer than their initial ice-cold interactions. They were KO parents, maybe even friends, though that word still felt tentative. Damien had kept his promises. He'd shown up for every scheduled visit. Never missed a commitment. Never let work take priority over Felix. He'd been there for Felix's first day of school, holding his son's hand as they walked through those kindergarten doors. He'd attended every parent-teacher conference, every school event, every class party. He'd learned to braid hair after Felix made friends with a girl named Maya, who taught him about friendship bracelets. He'd become an expert on dinosaurs because Felix had gone through a paleontology phase. He'd sat through countless animated movies, some of them multiple times, because his son wanted to share them with him. And slowly, Felix had stopped testing whether his dad would disappear, had stopped asking, "Will you be there?" before every event, had started assuming Damien would show up because he always did. "Dad!" Felix burst through the apartment door, returning from a morning playdate with one of his school friends. "Dad, guess what?" "What, buddy?" "Tyler's dad is taking us to the Science Museum next week. Can I go? Please? If your mom says it's okay, it's fine with me." Felix turned to Sienna with pleading eyes. She pretended to consider it seriously before nodding. Felix whooped with excitement and ran to his room to play with the new building set Damien had brought him last week. Damien watched him go, his heart full in a way it never had been when he was building Crosstech. This was success. This laughter. This excitement. This trust that he'd finally earned. "He's doing really well," Sienna said quietly, coming to stand beside Damien. His teacher says he's thriving, making friends, excelling academically, adjusting to stability like he was born for it. He was born for better than he got those first 5 years. He's getting better now. Thanks to you. The compliment was small, but from Sienna, it meant everything. She didn't give praise easily or lightly. Every acknowledgement was earned. I just show up, Damien said. That's the bare minimum of parenting. You'd be surprised how many people can't manage even that. But Damien? Sienna turned to face him fully. I need to tell you something. I got the job offer from Portland. Damien's stomach dropped. Sienna had been interviewing for a director position at a nonprofit in her hometown. It was a huge opportunity. Running youth programs for at-risk families, exactly the kind of work she'd trained for and dreamed about. That's great, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. That's what you wanted. It is. It's perfect, actually. But it would mean moving, relocating back to Portland with Felix. Yes, with Felix. They stood in silence for a moment. Damien felt panic rising in his chest. He'd finally built a relationship with his son, finally earned the right to be called Dad, finally figured out how to be present and consistent and there. And now they were leaving? When would you go? He managed to ask. If I accept, they want me to start in 3 months, which means Felix would finish this school year here and start first grade in Portland. Does he know? Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Figure out what this would mean for custody arrangements, how we'd handle visitation, whether I'll move to Portland, Damien said. Sienna blinked. What? I'll move to Portland. Get an apartment there. Be near Felix, so he doesn't have to choose between his parents, or only see me on holidays. Damien, you can't just uproot your entire life. Why not? Felix is my life now. Crosstech has a new CEO. I'm barely involved anymore beyond board meetings I can attend remotely. There's nothing keeping me in New York or San Francisco or anywhere else except Felix. So if he's going to Portland, I'm going to Portland. Sienna stared at him, clearly trying to process this. You'd really do that? Give up everything you've built? Move across the country? I'm not giving up anything important. I'm gaining proximity to my son. That's not a sacrifice. It's an obvious choice. What about your penthouse, your office, your whole life? My whole life is Felix. And you, as his mother and my CO parent. Everything else is just stuff and status that doesn't matter nearly as much as I thought it did. Sienna's eyes filled with tears. You've really changed. I had to. The person I was would have missed all of this. He gestured around the apartment, decorated for a 6-year-old's birthday party. Would have let you move to Portland without a second thought. Would have turned Felix's childhood into scheduled visits and holiday weekends. You don't want that. I want to be his father. Really be his father. Not the guy who shows up occasionally and tries to cram quality time into limited visits. I want to be there for his school plays and soccer, games and random Tuesday afternoons when nothing special is happening but he just wants to hang out. I want to be present for the boring parts and the hard parts, not just the highlight reel. Sienna wiped her eyes. The job offer isn't definite yet. I'm still thinking about it. But it's what you want. Yes, she admitted. It's exactly what I want. What I've been working toward my entire career, and Portland is home. My sister's getting her life together, and it would be good to be near her. But I won't take Felix away from you. Not when you've finally shown up. You're not taking him away. We'll figure it out together. Portland, Chicago, wherever you need to be. I'll be there too. They were interrupted by Felix running back into the living room, holding a paper he'd been working on. Dad, look, I drew a picture of our family. Damien took the paper, his heart catching. Felix had drawn 3 stick figures, one labeled Mom, one labeled Dad, and one smaller figure labeled me between them. They were all holding hands and smiling. Behind them was a house with a bright sun overhead. It's beautiful, buddy. Is that the apartment? No, it's our someday house. When we all live together like real families do. Damien glanced at Sienna, whose expression was complicated. They'd never talked about reconciliation, never suggested they'd be anything more than CO parents. But in Felix's 6-year-old mind, having both parents present meant they should all live in the same house. Families come in all different shapes, Sienna said gently. Some kids have parents who live together. Some have parents who live separately but still love them very much. What matters is that both your parents are here for you. I know, Felix said, but it would be cool if we lived together. He ran off again, leaving the drawing behind. Damien stared at it, at the simple hope it represented. The life Felix imagined, where his family was whole and together. I'm not suggesting we get back together, Damien said quietly. I know I destroyed that possibility. But maybe someday. Don't, Sienna interrupted. Please don't go there. We're in a good place now. We're building something that works for Felix. Let's not complicate it. You're right. Sorry. But the truth was, Damien had started to remember why he'd fallen in love with Sienna in the first place. Spending time with her, watching her mother their son, seeing her passion return as she got back into the work she loved. It reminded him of the woman he'd married, the one he'd been too blind to appreciate, until it was too late. Not that it mattered. Some things, once broken, couldn't be fixed. Some trust, once shattered, couldn't be rebuilt. Damien had made his choices, and one of those consequences was that Sienna would never see him as anything other than Felix's father. The party guests started arriving at 2 o'clock. Kids from Felix's kindergarten class, running around the apartment with the chaotic energy only 6-year-olds possessed. Miss Carmen from the shelter, bringing homemade cookies and hugs for Felix. A few other families from the transitional housing program who'd known them during the hard times. Damien watched Felix open presents. Modest gifts from classmates, thoughtful ones from Miss Carmen and the shelter families. He'd brought a new bike with training wheels, which made Felix's eyes go huge with excitement. Can you teach me to ride it? Felix asked, already putting on the helmet. Right now? Please? After the party, Damien promised. When your friends go home, we'll take it to the park, and I'll teach you. You promise? I promise. And Felix believed him. Didn't question it. Didn't doubt. Just accepted his dad's word, because Damien had proven over and over that his promises were good. They sang Happy Birthday. Felix blew out 6 candles. On a homemade cake, Sienna had stayed up late decorating. They played party games that got competitive and loud. They laughed when one kid accidentally knocked over the punch bowl. It was messy and chaotic and absolutely perfect. After the guests left and Sienna cleaned up, Damien took Felix to the park, as promised. They spent 2 hours on the bike, Damien running alongside, holding the seat steady while Felix pedaled. Falling, getting up, trying again. "I can't do it," Felix said after his 10th fall, frustrated tears in his eyes. "Yes, you can. You just haven't done it yet. There's a difference." They tried again, and suddenly, magically, Felix was pedaling on his own. Damien let go of the seat and watched his son ride, wobbly but independent, laughing with pure joy. "Dad, I'm doing it. Did you see?" "I saw. You're amazing." That night, after taking Felix home and helping get him ready for bed, Damien sat on the edge of his son's bed for their nightly routine. "Best birthday ever," Felix mumbled sleepily. "I'm glad, buddy." "Dad?" "Yeah? Will you still be my dad if we move to Portland?" So he'd overheard their conversation. Kids always heard more than adults thought they did. "Absolutely. I'll be your dad, no matter where you live. In fact, I'd probably move to Portland too, so we can still see each other all the time." "Really? Really? You're stuck with me now." Felix smiled and closed his eyes. "Good. I like being stuck with you." Damien sat there until his son fell asleep, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. This little person who'd somehow found it in his heart to forgive what Damien could never make right, who called him dad and believed in him and gave him a second chance he absolutely didn't deserve. Sienna appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. "He's out? Yeah? Long day. Good party, though." "Great party." Damien stood carefully, not wanting to wake Felix. He followed Sienna to the living room. "Have you made a decision about Portland?" "I think I'm going to take it. It's too good an opportunity to pass up." "And you really meant it? About moving there too?" "Completely. Just tell me when, and I'll find a place." Sienna was quiet for a moment. "You know what the old Damien would have done? Fought for custody, so he wouldn't have to relocate. Used his resources to make me look like I was disrupting Felix's life. Turned it into a legal battle. The old Damien was an idiot. No arguments there." She almost smiled. "But the new Damien, I'm starting to trust him. Not completely. Not yet. But more than I thought possible. That means everything to me. Just keep showing up. That's all Felix needs. That's all either of us needs. I will. I promise." And for the first time in their entire relationship, Sienna looked like she actually believed him. "So tell me, is change really possible? Or do people just pretend until they slip back into old patterns? Can someone who's hurt you deeply ever truly earn back your trust? And most importantly, do you think Damien's transformation is real or temporary? Drop your comments below and make sure you're subscribed for the final chapter, where we find out if this story gets a happy ending or just a realistic one. 18 months after the airport video went viral, Damien stood in the audience at Felix's elementary school in Portland, watching his 7-year-old son receive an award for academic excellence. Felix walked across the stage in his nice clothes. Not donation bin finds anymore, but new things that actually fit, and accepted his certificate with a shy smile. His eyes scanned the crowd until he found Damien and Sienna sitting together in the third row. When he spotted them, His whole face lit up. Damien felt his throat tighten. These moments, these ordinary, everyday moments that most parents took for granted, still felt like miracles to him. After the ceremony, Felix ran to them, certificate clutched in his hand. Did you see me get my award? We saw, sweetheart, Sienna said, hugging him tight. We're so proud of you. Can we get ice cream to celebrate? Absolutely, Damien said. Whatever flavor you want. They ended up at a local ice cream shop, Felix bouncing between them on the sidewalk, talking non-stop about his school day. Damien had moved to Portland 6 months ago, just as he'd promised. He had an apartment downtown, modest but comfortable, close enough to be present for drop-offs and pickups, near enough that Felix could bike over after school if he wanted. Damien's life looked completely different than it had 2 years ago. He'd sold his Manhattan penthouse, resigned from Crosstech's board entirely, letting go of the company he'd built. He did some consulting work remotely, just enough to stay engaged with the tech world, but his primary focus was being Felix's father. Some mornings he couldn't quite believe this was his life, that he was the guy who packed lunches and attended PTA meetings and volunteered at school field trips, that he knew all of Felix's classmates by name, that he'd become friends with other parents, bonding over the chaos of raising elementary schoolers. But it was his life now, and he wouldn't trade it for anything. At the ice cream shop, they ran into Sienna's younger sister, Holly. She'd been clean for 8 months now, working steadily and rebuilding her own life. She'd become a regular presence in Felix's world, the fun aunt who told inappropriate jokes and taught him card tricks. There's my favorite nephew, Holly said, ruffling Felix's hair. Heard you got an award. Brainbox. Aunt Holly. Felix hugged her enthusiastically. Want to see my certificate? While Holly admired Felix's achievement, Sienna pulled Damien aside. I need to talk to you about something. Damien's stomach clenched. In his experience, conversations that started that way never ended well. Okay, the nonprofit wants to expand. Open a second location in Seattle. They've asked me to run it. That's huge. Congratulations. It would mean relocating again. Not right away. Probably a year from now. But eventually, there it was. The pattern repeating, just when they'd built stability. Circumstances demanded change. Seattle's not that far, Damien said, trying to sound positive. 2-hour drive. I'm not taking the job, Sienna interrupted. Damien blinked. What? I'm turning it down. It's an amazing opportunity. But Felix is finally settled here. Good school, good friends, stability for the first time in his life. I'm not uprooting him again. Sienna, if it's what you want, what I want is for my son to have a childhood that isn't defined by constant upheaval. What I want is for him to keep having his dad around consistently. What I want is to prioritize his needs over my career advancement. You've already sacrificed so much. It's not a sacrifice, Sienna said firmly. It's a choice. I've got a good job here. I'm doing work I love. Felix is thriving. You've actually shown up and stayed shown up. Why would I mess with that? Damien looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman she'd become. Not the broke graduate student he'd married, not the desperate single mother fighting for survival, but someone who'd survived hell and come out stronger. Someone who'd maintained her values and compassion despite having every reason to become bitter. "You're incredible. You know that?" Sienna rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. "Don't get sappy on me. I'm serious. What you've done, raising Felix while dealing with everything I put you through, it's amazing. I did what any mother would do. Survived. Fought. Protected my kid. Not every mother could have done what you did. Felix is lucky to have you. He's lucky to have both of us." Finally, they rejoined Felix and Holly at the table. Spent the next hour eating ice cream and listening to Felix's elaborate plans for his upcoming summer vacation. He wanted to go to the science museum, learn to swim properly, maybe build a tree house if Dad would help. "We could build one in your mom's backyard," Damien suggested. "I saw some plans online that look pretty doable." "Really? You'd help me?" "Of course. What are dads for?" Felix beamed. Then he turned to Sienna. "Mom, can Damien come to dinner at our house tonight? I want to show him the project I've been working on for science class." Sienna glanced at Damien, something unreadable in her expression. "If your dad doesn't have other plans, he's welcome to come." "I don't have other plans," Damien said quickly. So that evening, Damien found himself in Sienna's kitchen, helping prepare dinner while Felix worked on his science project in the living room. They'd fallen into this routine over the past few months. Casual dinners a few times a week, nothing formal, just CO parents sharing time with their son. But tonight felt different somehow. Sienna was quieter than usual, more contemplative. Damien couldn't quite read her mood. "Is everything okay?" he asked while chopping vegetables. "Yeah, just thinking about..." Sienna set down her knife and turned to face him. "About how strange it is that we're here, in my kitchen, cooking dinner together like normal people. Is that bad strange? Or good strange?" "I don't know. Both, maybe." She paused. "2 years ago, I watched you throw money at me in an airport and didn't even recognize me. I was convinced you were the worst person I'd ever met, that you'd permanently destroyed any capacity I had to trust anyone. I was that person. I don't blame you for thinking that, but you're not anymore. Or if you are, you're hiding it really well. You've been consistent for almost 2 years now. You haven't missed a single commitment. You've put Felix first, even when it cost you things you used to care about. You've changed. I had to. The alternative was losing my son forever. Is that the only reason? Fear of loss?" Damien considered the question carefully. "At first, maybe. But now? Now I've just become a different person. I've learned what actually matters. I've discovered that being Felix's dad gives me more satisfaction than any business deal ever did. I've realized that the life I was chasing was empty compared to the life I'm living now. Do you regret it? Giving up cross-tech? The power and prestige and all that? Not even a little bit. That life made me successful, but miserable. This life helping Felix with homework, teaching him to ride a bike, sitting in the audience at his school ceremonies. This makes me happy." Sienna was quiet for a long moment. "I've been thinking about something Felix asked me last week." "What's that?" "He wanted to know if you and I would ever get back together. Live in the same house, like some of his friends' parents do." Damien's heart started pounding. "What did you tell him?" "That I didn't know. That life is complicated. That just because we both love him doesn't mean we're supposed to be together as a couple. That's a good answer. Is it? Because I don't know if I believe it anymore. Damien turned to face her fully, hardly daring to hope. What are you saying? I'm saying... Sienna took a breath. I'm saying that I've spent 2 years watching you be the man I always hoped you'd be. I've seen you prioritize our son over everything else. I've watched you change your entire life to be present for him. I've seen you become the father he deserves and the partner I needed all along. Sienna, I'm not saying I'm ready to just pick up where we left off. I'm not saying I'm over what happened, but I'm saying maybe I could imagine a future where we're more than just CO parents, where we actually rebuild something together. Slowly, carefully, without any guarantees. Are you serious? Terrifyingly serious. Which is insane, right? After everything you did, everything I went through, I should never want anything to do with you romantically. But here we are, and you're different. And I'm different. And maybe we could be different together. Damien felt tears streaming down his face. I would like that. I would like that more than anything in the world. But only if you're sure. Only if you really believe I've changed for good. I don't know if anyone can ever be sure, but I'm willing to find out. For Felix, and maybe for us, too. From the living room, Felix called out, "Mom, Dad, come see what I built." They looked at each other, both crying, both smiling, both uncertain but hopeful. Then they walked into the living room together to see Felix's science project, a model of the solar system made from painted styrofoam balls. "This is incredible, buddy," Damien said, crouching down to examine it. "Did you do all this yourself?" Mom helped with the painting, but I did the research and the positioning and figured out the distances between planets. "He's been working on it for weeks," Sienna said proudly. "It's for the school science fair next month. You're going to win, for sure," Damien said. "Will you both come to the science fair together?" Felix's question was casual, but Damien heard the hope underneath it. His son wanted his parents there, wanted his family whole, even if it didn't look like other families. "Of course we'll both be there," Sienna said. "We wouldn't miss it." That night, after helping clean up from dinner, Damien headed to his apartment, but not before Felix gave him a tight hug goodbye. "Love you, Dad. Love you too, buddy. See you tomorrow for your soccer game." "You'll be there?" "Front row, cheering louder than anyone else." Felix grinned and ran back inside. Sienna walked Damien to his car, the Portland evening cool and pleasant around them. Damien said, "We're really doing this. Trying to rebuild?" "Slowly," Sienna emphasized. "No rushing. No pressure. Just seeing if there's still something here worth building on. I can do slow." "Good, because I'm not the same person you married 15 years ago. I've been through too much. I'm harder in some ways, more guarded. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is." Sienna almost smiled. "When did you get wise?" "When I finally started paying attention to what mattered." He kissed her forehead, a gentle, careful gesture that respected all her boundaries, and got in his car. As he drove back to his apartment, Damien thought about the past 2 years. about how completely his life had changed, about how the worst thing that had ever happened to him, that viral video, had somehow led to the best thing. He'd lost an empire, but gained a son, given up billions, but found purpose, destroyed one life only to build something better from the ruins. Was it redemption? Maybe, maybe not. Some things could never be fully redeemed. Some damage was permanent, but it was a second chance. And Damien was determined not to waste it. 3 months later, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, Damien helped Felix build a treehouse in Sienna's backyard. They worked together, measuring, cutting, hammering. Felix handed tools to his dad and asked a million questions about how everything fit together. Sienna watched from the patio, sipping coffee and reading a book. Every so often, she'd look up and smile at the sight of them working together. Higher on that side, Felix directed, "It has to be level, or it'll fall down." "You're absolutely right. Good eye, buddy." They'd been dating for 6 weeks now. Damien and Sienna, taking it slow, like she'd insisted. Dinners without Felix, sometimes. Actual conversations about their feelings and fears. Therapy, both individual and as a couple, working through all the damage that had been done. It was hard. Some days were harder than others. Sienna still had moments where she'd see Damien in an expensive suit and remember the man who'd walked past her in that airport. Damien still struggled with the guilt of everything he'd missed, everything he'd destroyed. But they were trying, building something new from the pieces of what they'd once had. "Done," Felix announced, climbing up to test the treehouse platform. "It's perfect. Can I sleep out here tonight?" "Maybe in the summer," Sienna called. "When it's warmer." "Dad, will you still help me build stuff when I'm grown up?" "Absolutely. I plan to be around for a long time." "Promise?" "Promise." And this time, it was a promise Damien knew he'd keep. Later that evening, after Felix fell asleep, Damien and Sienna sat on her couch, not quite touching, but close enough to feel connected. "I never thought we'd get here," Sienna admitted. "I never thought I could trust you again." "Do you trust me?" "Getting there? Ask me again in a year." "I will." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Sienna said, "You know what the worst part about all this was? Not the homelessness, not the struggle, not even the legal battles. What was it? Having Felix ask why his daddy didn't love him enough to be there. Having to lie and make excuses and try to protect him from the truth that his father had chosen a company over his own son. "I'm sorry," Damien said, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry for all of it. I know you are, and I'm working on forgiving you. But Damien, if you ever, and I mean ever, make that choice again, if you ever prioritize anything over Felix, or treat him like he's less important than your work, if you ever become that person again, I won't. I can't. I've seen what that costs, and I'd rather lose everything else than lose him. Or us." Damien looked at her. This woman who'd survived hell because of his neglect, who'd somehow found it in her heart to give him another chance, who was braver and stronger than he'd ever be. "Or us," he confirmed. "You're both my entire world now." "Good answer." She leaned against him, and they stayed like that until it was time for Damien to go home. As he drove through Portland's quiet streets back to his apartment, Damien thought about the man he'd been 2 years ago. The billionaire CEO who'd measured success in stock prices and market share. Who'd believed wealth and power were what mattered. Who'd been so consumed with building an empire that he'd lost sight of everything real. That man was gone, dead, and buried in the wreckage of his own making. In his place was someone simpler, but better. A father who showed up. A partner who tried. A man who'd learned that true success wasn't counted in dollars, but in moments. In a son's laughter, in trust, earned back slowly, in the chance to build something that actually mattered. The story didn't have a fairy tale ending. Damien and Sienna were still figuring things out, still healing, still learning how to be together after everything that had happened. Felix was thriving, but would carry scars from those early years of instability. But they were trying, all three of them, building something new day by day. And maybe that was the real lesson. That redemption wasn't a destination, but a journey. That change happened in small moments of choosing differently. That being better was a daily decision, not a one-time transformation. Damien had been given a second chance he didn't deserve, and he was determined to spend the rest of his life proving he could be worthy of it. One day at a time, one promise kept at a time, one moment of presence at a time. That was enough. It had to be enough. And slowly, miraculously, it was becoming more than enough. It was becoming a life worth living. So what did you think of Damien's journey? Do people really change? Or do they just learn to be better actors? Can someone who's hurt you deeply ever truly earn redemption? And most importantly, what does success actually mean? If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And drop a comment telling me your thoughts. I want to know if you believe in second chances, or if some mistakes are just too big to forgive. Subscribe to American Lore Chronicles TV by Mr. Jeff for more powerful stories about life, love, and what really matters. Because at the end of the day, success isn't about what you achieve. It's about who you are when nobody's watching, and how you treat the people who need you most. Remember this: the people you love are your real wealth. The time you spend with them is your real success. And being present is worth more than any empire you could ever build. Thank you for watching this journey with us. Until next time, this is Mr. Jeff reminding you to never forget what truly matters in life. God bless, and I'll see you in the next story.